Okay, welcome back, everybody. We will continue with our 2018 budget review. Where we left off was community living service area, and we had just finished the operational side. And so, Director Miraji, I think we're going to move on to the capital side.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I can have, there we go. I'll just jump right in. So this is our approved capital activities for 2018. So you'll find those listed in the long-term capital plan document. Now I've combined some of those numbers together. But I'll go through those and break them out. So the first one is the Bear Creek South Diamond renewal for $110,000. Excuse me. That's an annual allocation that we have to continually improve and fix the 10 diamonds at South Bear Creek, and so this one is allocated for those repairs. I believe diamond number 4 is the one that's targeted this next year. On the park side of things, there is $771,000 and some change. In terms of the breakdown, there's $20,000 for the Muskosipi Park kiosk and signage. That's a wayfinding and service improvement initiative. There is $150,000 for a senior playground replacement and resurfacing at Muskosipi Park. And seniors is older children, not seniors per se. And then there's $150,000 as well identified as non-government sources. This playground was developed in 2004. It's one of the older ones. I believe it's the second oldest playground in the city of Grande Prairie, and that one does require some updating and renovations, and so there'll be some more discussions on that I'll go into detail. The other one, the next one, is Muskosipi Park Infrastructure Replacement Program. That's for $50,000. Those are things like replacing picnic benches, or tables and benches, and other infrastructure in Muskosipi Park. There was $100,000. That's part of that 771, which is for cemetery work, and so that particular piece is identified to do to upgrade the cemetery kiosk with more information for the public. It is designed for improved customer service and wayfinding as well. The block markers are to identify how to get around the cemetery easier. There is 125 and 125. So the 125, that's capital tax, is for the Sargent Community Park outdoor rink. And that's an outdoor rink that's been estimated at a cost of $250,000 initially. And the amount 125 was earmarked for tax, and then the other 125, the non-government sources, are identified as a contribution that the city is hoping to receive from a private source.
Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. Would you just to get me up to speed, what's the Sargent Community Park, like the outdoor rink? Where is this located? Over in the Montrose Golf Course site, or where is it located?
Through the chair, actually, that's a good question.
I can help you out, Director.
Okay.
I don't know why I saw it recently. So it's the space that's between Derek Taylor and Kateri Mission Public Schools. It's the large park space that's directly adjacent and in between those two schools.
Okay, thank you. And just wanted to chime in there on the parks. What's a normal life expectancy for a playground or a park structure? What's our kind of hope for a duration of a life?
Through the chair, it depending on the usage, of course, but it's estimated to be around 15 to 20 years is the life cycle, a typical life cycle. This particular playground, my understanding is gets quite a bit of use, and there's been some outdated equipment that needs to be replaced.
Thank you.
Thanks, Director Miyaji.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will continue then. And then just going back to the parks, the playground equipment for Muskogee Park, the senior playground, there is attached to the 150 capital tax that's been approved, and then there's the 150 that's the non-governmental sources, which I understand there's been a $30,000 grant that they're applying for right now, which they won't find out until December. So that's the portion of that, the non-governmental source. The other component is a $400,000 ask from the public reserve that's designated for playground, but that'll come up in the next slide. So I won't go into too much detail there yet.
Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bill. Director Miyaji, under that seniors playground, now that's the lawn bowling area. So as far as the other non-governmental sources, have we heard from the group that helps to operate that space what their fundraising totals are to date, or are we just putting aside money and being hopeful?
Through the chair, I'm afraid I don't know the update on that. I can get that for you, that particular piece. What I do know is a $30,000 grant piece so far. So I can get that information a little bit later.
Okay. And also just in regards to the usage of that space, it's typically been underutilized. If we were to undertake a renovation, would we just put it back as is and still see it underutilized, or would we try to seek out other programming that we might be able to get better use out of the playground for seniors?
Through the chair, there will be new equipment there, and there'll be some improved landscaping. Let me just get a little bit more information here. Some of the activities that they're hoping to achieve there are they want to remove the sand. I guess there's a safety issue with the sand always shifting over there. It's on a slope, I believe. So they're going to dig that out and make it into a more accessible platform or ground, if you will. And some of the so a lot of the work is resurfacing the playground for safety purposes and for accessible usage.
Director Miyaji, sorry, I didn't want to interject. I just want to make sure. I think we may be talking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Things.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So, Councillor Thiessen, you're referencing the lawn bowling.
Lawn bowling area, yeah.
Where do you see that? Where do you see that referenced in our budget? Or in the capital, like in the capital plan?
Well, that's what I was understanding as the senior playground replacement and resurfacing.
So near the pavilion, there are I think two different playgrounds. There's the junior playground, which if you're standing at the pavilion looking back is to the right. It now has an accessible poured in place tire surface, was repaired because the swings were shifting and whatever. So that one council did last term. The senior playground is one that has a rock climbing wall and the metal structure to the left.
Okay.
And so this is the
senior
project in our description is the left side playground.
Sorry, yeah, I got thrown off the page when I heard it was for seniors, and I guess it was just the older children. But you know what? I'm looking across the table at an older child and Councillor Kevin O'Toole, and I know you like to have fun too. So, no time. Let's move on.
Okay, good. Okay, just make sure we're not talking at cross purposes. Councillor Clayton, did you have a question as well? That was clarification. Okay. Thanks, Director Miyaji. Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Director Miyaji.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going on to transit, and that'll come up in a second there. So we have a total of 1.19 million. Majority of that is for new growth buses. We're looking at 1 or 2 growth buses for that amount. And when I say 1 or 2, it's based on what it's based on the type of bus we're thinking of buying. When these were priced out 4 years ago, there was a look to see if we should continue to get diesel buses. Now we're looking at electric buses, so the price fluctuates from that type of equipment. So we may be able to get one, probably one bus out of that with some change. $67,000 of that 1.19 million is dedicated to DTS for their replacement bus, and $25,000 is also part of that, and that's part of the shelter replacement slash purchase. So that's part of a bigger pot that Transit is looking at, and we're hoping to obtain about 25 to 30 shelters with that $25,000 as part of the bigger pot.
See Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. I guess on the transit, I'm wondering, like when I look at the operating budget and potentially capital budget here, we're 6.7 million-ish next year we're going to spend on transit. And I believe at committee last week we talked about 600,000-ish riders using the transit currently. So we're costing about $11 per person every time we see somebody get on a bus, if I look at the math that way. I'm just wondering if this is a need or if this is a shiny want, or where are we at with the buses, because I know we need to have, we're obligated to have some sort of public transportation, and I want public transportation. I don't know if I can support $11 a rider of what it's costing us to put somebody on a bus. I feel like that's a tall order. And so I guess what I'm wondering on the buses is what's the cost, when I believe when I read the transit master rotation plan, or transit master plan, was $624,000 for the buses that we're looking at ordering. Do you know how much the cost difference is if we just went to a diesel bus?
Yes, so through the chair, so a 30-foot diesel bus that we currently have in stock, so they range about 400,000 and a little bit of change. The electric buses are a little over 600,000 for the same 30-foot dimension. Transit ridership has stagnated a little bit the last couple of years. We are hoping with the new transit master plan and with the intent of increasing service frequency and redesigning the routes, that we are anticipating a growth in transit use. Our transit spare ratio, or the bus that we have, and the buses that we have in service compared to the buses that we have as backup is deficient, and so these growth buses are intended to augment that. The ridership is so when I say ridership, I should maybe better preface in terms of budget. Our revenues for transit through ridership has been about 550,000, 570,000. It should be around 650, maybe aggressively 700,000. We think that with the infusion of some of these growth buses, we do have some replacement buses as part of this calculation as well, will help us achieve that ridership. The other piece to this amount, 366,000 is what the city contributes. There is 700,000 plus that is grant funded attached to this, so part of the provincial Green Trip grant. And so these are matching funds that we're able to obtain the grant in order to purchase these buses.
So would we still be able to purchase the buses through the TRIP program if they were a diesel bus?
Through the chair, yes, we would. We can purchase any type of bus that we hope is appropriate. The diesel buses and the electric buses, there are inherent benefits and challenges for both types of buses, we feel that the electric bus probably is a strategic investment for transit.
I just one other one. The 10-year plan, when I looked at the transit master plan, I believe it ramped up to about double the ridership, but it also went up to about $9.5 million a year to facilitate it. So we would still be running similar numbers of about between $8 and $11 per person to put them on a bus. I'm just trying to get a sense of what other communities are at, and just before we keep going down a path, if maybe there's another path we could look at, whether it's mentioned in there, other things, and so I guess in the bigger picture, I'd like to, I don't know if we're allowed to flag, but I'm wondering if this is the best use of capital tax to be purchasing more buses at this time. So I guess my general comment here. So I'll leave it at that. Sorry.
That's fine, Councillor Platt. It sounds, so you asked a couple of questions in terms of like cost per rider and experience from other communities. Some of that may be information that administration has in the organization somewhere that could be provided to answer some of those questions. And so this might be an area where further detail will be needed. And I think if administration is sort of taking down this request for information or the need to get additional detail, then we can provide that.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Toole?
Yeah, I just have a comment. That's 600,000 vehicles that aren't driving down the road and looking for parking spots. So there's other things to consider. Use and abuse of the roads by not having 600,000 vehicles on the road either. So just a comment.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. And in fairness, so we're not, so Councillor Platt was looking, wanted additional context to better understand the issue so that he'd be able in a position to advocate for it one way or another, but we're not necessarily debating it at this point. Any other questions for administration on this? Councillor Clayton, do you have a question?
You can talk for me. That's great. Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. I'm just curious if we're not going to debate it now, when will we debate it?
Well, I guess if the question is, do we or don't we buy buses?
Yeah, that's not my question. Okay. My question is more operational. So
on
transit, in regards to the transit master plan, we've reviewed it. Generally, the concept, sort of came to committee and council and to the public. And at what point do we say, I think, overall it's great, but I'm only comfortable with this amount of money?
Sure. So the transit master plan was actually more than just reviewed. It's been adopted by council. So it exists as one of the master plans that administration builds their budget scenarios and the operational plan for the city on. I guess I would look to the city manager to see to what extent does council have influence or latitude to influence the pace of implementation of an adopted master plan. I guess is sort of the question.
That's my specific question. I agree in the transit master plan overview. I think it's great. I think the increased rider opportunities isn't to Councillor Platt's comments. I don't think it's overreaching. I think that the transit master plan was well done. I think that we will see an increase in riders based on routes, etc. Whether or not we're going to buy more buses, let's have that discussion. But for me, how much of this is implementing the service issues? Because I think the service issues will help the ridership. So that's the sort of level of detail I'm looking for.
Mr. City Manager, do you have some input for us?
Yeah, just in terms of process, this is in part an operational question, but it is in part a strategic question. The master plan is clearly a strategic document. When it was adopted, it did start in motion a series of events that start to execute on that master plan.
Sorry, Mr. City Manager, your microphone went off there somehow. I don't know if, there you go. You're back on.
Someone around the table has figured out how to mute me. This could be really dangerous. The transit master plan, once having been adopted, does start a sequence of events that start to execute on that. These buses are part of the transit master plan, so we can't fully execute the master plan without buying the equipment to do it. There are a couple of components, though. One of the things I was hearing queried was, how did we do the economics on the differential in capital costs between a diesel and an electric bus? And that's an interesting question, and we don't have that answer at the table right now, but can certainly follow up on it. And before we tender and award electric buses, regardless of whether it's grant funded or funded from our own purse, we should have a pretty good handle on why we're speccing vehicles the way that we are. The other component on this, when we look at the net cost per ride and what's been cited as $11, a big part of that consideration is what does the fare box generate? And we do observe, and the Transit Master Plan was quite thorough in pointing out, we're at about an 18% revenue cost ratio in Grande Prairie. A typical well-performing urban, mid-sized city urban transit system runs closer to 30%. So we are definitely not performing from a financial perspective at the level that other municipalities are. What we determined in considering the Transit Master Plan is that part of that is fee-driven. We haven't had rate increases for transit in a long time. And even in this budget, the rate increases that are being contemplated are quite nominal. So the execution of the master plan is going to be partly tender impacted when we go out and look for equipment, partly operationally impacted in terms of whether we immediately expand into service areas that were identified in that plan or whether we're more gradual, and partly fees and charges impacted when we do our complete fees and charges review. So in terms of when do we come to grips with, is this the right budget for transit or not? I can't be much more prescriptive than that. You will see several opportunities as the execution occurs to opine and to examine and even to stop processes if you don't believe that they're right. And presumably before we do a tender on a electric bus, we would have a very thorough analysis as to why that particular piece of equipment is being spec'd that way.
Councillor Plott, I see in the queue. Do you have something additional, or?
Yeah, I forgot to reference one of the things that brought this to my attention was when we went through the citizen budget highlights yesterday. Those transit was ranked as one of the bottom 3 priorities, and yet we're deploying or spending a lot more money in this area. So I kind of wonder if we're heading into an era of priority-based budgeting, and we're hearing from the community that this isn't a priority, but we're about to spend another 1.1 million in capital on it. My gut's just saying that maybe the timing's not right with what we're hearing from our citizens.
Okay. I turned off my own microphone. Thanks, Councillor Plott. And so I think we're continuing on with community living. Director Miyagi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The last item on the chart is fleet, and there's $3.5 million that would be reflected of the fleet replacement purchases for all the rolling stock in the city. So the capital budget, the approved capital budget in total is $5.5 million. Going on to the referred items for capital, we have culture and heritage. Now there's $1.45 million. The actual ask that will show in the book is $600,000, and this it's contingent upon culture and heritage being able to get this Canada Cultural Spaces Fund. It's a grant of $850,000 or thereabouts. If we are not successful in getting that grant, then the $600,000 will come off the table, and we won't know about this grant until later on, and it's very close, but later on this month or early December. So we won't know of that. So in the event that we don't get the grant, we will need to come back to council to readdress how we do the renovation work at the museum.
I see Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. Director Miyagi, in regards to the matching grant, if we're applying for $850,000 but only putting $600,000 into it of our own money, how does that quantify as a matching grant contribution?
Through the chair, there is currently $850,000 that's already allocated to this project, and so that was from a previous year. And so if we get that grant, we can use portions of that to offset the matching.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Director Miyagi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will continue on. The Heritage Village improvements for $20,000. That is it's an improvement in the foundation of one of the structures in the museum grounds. I believe it's the Miller Taxi building, and it needs some foundation repair. The Regional Performing Arts and Media facility, the $200,000. The city manager briefly mentioned it yesterday. This is a feasibility study for us to undertake to see if the Performing Arts Center will be viable here. There's a business case attached to this work, so that's what that amount is for.
I see Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I keep coming back to this one where it says Regional Performing Arts and Media Facility. Have we had any conversations with the county or the MD about being involved with this next level of feasibility?
Director Miyagi?
Yes, through the chair. The region, so the county and our other neighbors, we have been in dialogue with them in terms of the entire project per se. I do not believe that we've necessarily asked them to contribute towards this $200,000 piece.
And just further to that, at the initiation of the dialogue around it, the city took a specific step to invite municipalities from across the region. There was an event that was happening at the Grande Prairie Live Theatre, and municipalities from across the region were invited to that before the first level sort of investigation of the project. Some attended, some didn't attend. Some attended and said, let us know when you're doing more on this. We're interested to hear how it goes. But there hasn't, and the project hasn't been to a stage where there has been a specific ask made, as Councillor Miyagi said. But those initial steps of attempting to engage other municipalities in the region in the project concept at the very, very conceptual stage absolutely happened.
So is it possible if we were to approve this line item that we, I guess, could approve it with an assumption that we're also asking our regional neighbors to be part of this feasibility study if we're going to go ahead with it, as I think it's an unfunded one now? The one question. And my other question is, how much have we spent into the planning and the feasibility and all the implementation part of it so far around the Regional Performing Arts Center? Do we know what we've spent thus far with this facility?
Director Miyagi?
Through the chair, I'm inclined to say 80,000, but I don't think that's the right number. I would have to actually get that information because the report that was done, there was some consultants, I believe Stantec was involved in the initial report, and there were some funds allocated to that enabled us to bring back that initial report. I would have to get that information to get you the exact number.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor O'Toole?
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I was just wondering what the consequences would be if we were to hold off 1 year on this and bring it to our big budget next year. If that would be something that would cause a lot of grief with the planning process.
Director Miyagi?
Through the chair, that would be council's choice to do so. In terms of the timing, I would have to say that it wouldn't be a critical delay. The information that was presented earlier this year may become a little bit stale if they are referring to that piece of information, but 1 year may not propose a critical.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. Director Miyagi, anything
yes.
to highlight for us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We have one more item, and that's the Muscat CP Park Senior Playground, and I spoke to that a little bit, where $400,000 of this project is being asked for approval for us to pulled from the public reserve, which is defined for this type of use. So in total, we have, as it's identified there, $820,000 ask, of which plus $400,000 from the reserve is the referred items from CLT.
Councillor Friesen.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Does the senior playground park replacement then impact the budget request that was already in for parks of $771,000? Because I jotted down that includes resurfacing that playground. So would we then see some relief on that if the playground was completely replaced?
Director Miyagi.
Through the chair, I believe the entire project budget ideally would be the 150 that's already in the capital budget, plus the 400,000 that's being asked for in the reserve. Where they may need to trim back some of their plans would be the 150 that's the non-governmental sources, which the $30,000 is being applied for a grant. So with that said, if the $400,000 from reserve is not doesn't go forward, I don't believe they could do this project.
Just to clarify, and Councillor Thiessen, I see you in the queue. So in our slides or in the slide deck, there's a notation that says with this 400,000 seeking approval for council to use the public reserve. Do we need a specific motion? Is that why that notation is there? Is it that did the approved capital plan not contemplate using the public reserve, and so that would be a specific change to the capital plan? Is that what that notation's about, or why? I appreciate what Councillor Friesen is saying, that we heard about this playground previously in parks, and then it's here. So what's the relationship between what we heard previously and what's referenced on this slide?
Mr. Chair, I believe that $400,000 ask to pull from the reserve is based on some of the cost assessments that they've done. So when the capital budget was set 4 years ago, I think that was the anticipation for approximately how much, and then looking at what they are hoping to do at that park. The $400,000 is what administration felt is important to do all the work that's needed there.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I guess I'll go back because this is a lot of money that we're looking at putting into the playground park. I guess total 700,000. So my question is, Director Miyagi, is it a need to have or a nice to have? Are we just doing this because we updated the other park, the smaller park right beside, and so therefore we have decided that we're just going to update all the parks? Or I believe the question came up, has it deteriorated to a certain standard now? Is that deterioration a safety issue? So back to the original question, is it a need to have or a nice to have?
Through the chair, I believe it is a need to have. The playground is one of the oldest in Grande Prairie. My understanding is it is a highly used play area, but the equipment that they have there is outdated. And some of the parts for replacement, they don't exist now, or they're very expensive to obtain, if not even challenging to obtain. So as the pieces deteriorate further, there would need to be a cost to actually take the equipment out, or once again put in new equipment. This is also a move to make this park area more accessible. And that's not currently the case right now. And so whether we call that a safety thing or an inclusive thing, I would say that it would be a combination of both. And so myself and the Parks Department believe this is a need to have for a old play equipment and play area that is starting to look like it needs refurbishment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Director Miyagi. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. With the Muskogee, so I'm just trying to. I have 2 young kids, and it's the Jewel of Grande Prairie. It's amazing, but next year we're going to also be putting an outdoor facility there for a swimming pool. We just added a new park structure over by the hospital site. So if we're putting $700,000 more into this area, what's starting to hit me more is thinking longer term. That will mean probably 15 or 20 years, we're looking at a $1.1 million replacement with inflation for this area. So I love parks. I think they're great. I'm concerned, I guess, if we keep replacing all these parks and adding new parks, are we compounding a really big problem down the road when we have to replace all these parks? And the financial implications on the capital tax side of this could be very big long term. So I guess to Councillor Thiessen's point is, if it's a need or a want, and it sounds like it's a need, but if it's on the want side, at some point we're going to have to replace the wants with another, what we'll think is a need at that point. So I caution us making sure that we're putting in needs and not wants. So maybe more of a comment.
Thanks, Councillor Plott. Obviously, always a consideration for us as we go through the budgeting process, and council sort of discerning, trying to find out the difference and decide amongst ourselves and for the community as a whole. Director Miyagi, did you want to highlight the summary table, or have you covered everything in the capital side?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Essentially, it's just the summary table, the very last page where, well, that's the capital summary, and we'll just skip to that and go to the summary page, which just essentially highlights what I covered the last couple of hours, and that concludes my presentation.
Okay. Thanks very much, Director Miyagi. Councillor O'Toole.
Just more of an information. We just attended a skate bar upgrade, and that was already taken. The money was already in the budget already, right? So, okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. So looking at the agenda, I don't think we're in a position where we would need to have a break at this point. Are we ready to move into the City Manager Corporate Services budget scenarios? And if so, I see Director Walker is getting her microphone ready to go. So Director Walker, we'll look to you.
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. A reminder before I begin that scenario budgets have been built based on starting with the 2018 originally forecasted budget, and the base 3% and 0% scenarios represent a combination of increased revenues and decreased expenditures to meet the established targets. And keeping in mind that all of those changes were made across the organization in order to meet those targets. So I'm going to present 2 separate service areas, the city manager's area and corporate services. I have broken down corporate services into 2 sections to make it a little bit easier to present. The operating departments are represented on the slides as corporate services, and fiscal services I separated out. So I will deal with operating first. In order to establish the base scenario, adjustments were made to the council area. Historically, council has experienced between $150,000 and $200,000 surplus annually, and so we felt that a $40,000 reduction in the council's operating budget would still be conservative. In city manager's service area, there were a number of adjustments. City manager's program was reduced by $45,000, and effectively it eliminates a second-year internship program. In the human resource area, was reduced by nearly $50,000, and miscellaneous expenditures in travel, mileage, phone, and professional services. In the health and safety area, we reduced that by $1,500, and basically travel and subscriptions. Communication and citizen engagement, we reduced by $21,000, which was essentially travel, telephone, and advertising. Economic development, we reduced by $36,000, and that was essentially advertising, printing, and consulting costs. I've got abbreviations in here that I can't. Oh, corporate web management, sorry. I have to interpret my own notes here. Was a reduction of $23,000 in memberships, telephone and advertising, public relations, and a bit of software support. And in legislative services, we reduced $56,000, and that was partially a reduction to our census costs, which we provide every 2 years, and a reduction to our courier service that provides internal courier for the organization. Under fiscal services, there's a $1.1 million reduction, and that is related to the costs of providing employee benefits. And this was due to a number of realities. One is realigning the benefit costs to reflect accurate costs. We had embedded in the budget an estimate, a projected estimate of what benefit costs would be to the end of 2018. And some of the individual benefits did not realize the increases that we had projected. So there were savings there. As well, we saved benefit costs due to contract negotiations with our unions. Those negotiations realized a lower wage increase than what we had originally anticipated. So the total at the 4.2 level is a revenue figure, because I've included property tax revenue in these slides as well in the fiscal service area. So under the 3% scenario, we made additional reductions. First of all, to information technology for $148,000. Essentially, that is a change in our computer and laptop and hardware replacement practices. So it's a change in a business practice for IT. We will be extending the life of individual hardware, depending on the type, between 1 and 3 years. This comes with a minimal risk of having a mass failure at some point and needing to replace on a faster pace than what we had expected. But we do believe that this is a reasonable amount to, or a reasonable model to follow. Under assessment taxation, we have reduced by $23,000, and that is essentially consulting expenses that we use to help in unusual situations, particularly with assessment appeals. And this does present a risk. However, we feel it's an acceptable risk. In the 3% scenario, we were $500,000 short of meeting that 3% target. So we came up with a strategy where we would use we would reduce the capital tax levy. And the reason we proposed this is because in the original 2018 budget, we had budgeted for a $2 million increase to the special capital tax levy. And so in essence, what we said we could reduce that funding level, and as long as we were able to fund those projects that were funded by that capital tax through another source, then this would be a viable option. So so this is part of it. So this would be a $500,000 reduction to the capital tax levy. In the 0% scenario, city manager's area relieved another $164,000. $29,000 of general expenditures in council budget again. City manager, an additional reduction to eliminate the entire municipal intern program. Health and safety, there was a further $1,000 reduction. It's very small, but that's a very, very small program. Communication and citizen engagement reductions in further reductions in travel telephone memberships, and the elimination of the advertising in the yellow pages reduced another $15,000. Economic development reductions to advertising, printing, and consulting of $26,000. Corporate web reductions of $17,000. And in legislative services, there was a further reduction to courier services of $3,000 plus $37,000 reduction in legal services. Assessment and taxation, we're able to find another $10,000 within their miscellaneous expenditures. And again, in the fiscal service area, we determined that we would require an additional $1.3 million of capital tax. So we reduced that capital tax special levy by, altogether, this would make $1.8 million. So this is a summary of those service areas. In the capital budget.
The Councillor Palat.
Okay.
Thanks, Mayor Given. On the couple line items when I look at a 2017 budget that kind of concern me a little bit are we've dropped the economic development budget on the target of 0% by $272,000 from the 17 budget. And we've also dropped legislative services by $112,000 from its original budget. And they're pretty aggressive for the size of budgets. They are pretty big movements in other direction. Are we concerned at all that we're going to have effective legislative services and economic development programs with that reduction in cuts?
Director Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Given. As our city manager indicated, these were very considered proposals, and we're not presenting anything that we would not be able to implement if that was council's decision.
In fairness, I think that's part of the summary. And at the same time, I think I heard the city manager say, and there would be, at the 0%, there would be that's where we start to see, at minimum, a noticeable or perceivable impact. Right?
No, I can appreciate, because those look like pretty big line item drops. So I mean, those aren't fun decisions, but they're big line item drops that really caught my attention. So thank you.
So back to capital. So as a normal practice in the capital area, management aligns our funding sources to our capital projects to best maximize the use of reserve funds. And, obviously meeting the restraints and established policies by council or our legislative requirements. So these are the current projects in the 2018 capital plan. Economic development has a budget of $610,000. Facility maintenance has a budget of $1.1 million, and information technology has a budget of $2 million. Those projects are listed in section 2 of your binders under the approved long-term capital plan. In addition, we have included referred items that are recommended by management, which would see $500,000 for the infill and facade improvement program, and that is a continuation of an existing project. The funding, which has been fully allocated. So the funding would be used to reopen the program to provide funding for 2018. There are a number of businesses that have expressed interest in submitting applications if the program had additional funding. The next project is a downtown incentives for the York Germain Park. That would be at a cost of $540,000. This is essentially the same downtown incentive program that is fully subscribed. The existing so the existing fund commitments are $780. The York Germain project on its own is a $1.26 million project. We have approved funding for 1.5, and we have a shortfall of 540,000. This would complete our commitment to that project. And the final project on this list is the Curling Club new ice surface of $250,000. In your capital plan, you'll see under facilities that this project was a, just a second. Sorry. This project is a $500,000 project. 250 of it is coming from capital tax. And originally, we had applied for a grant, a provincial grant under the ACP program called Metropolitan Funding. Now, after this project was approved in the capital plan, the provincial government eliminated the metropolitan funding component of that grant program. And so we were left with a shortfall to complete this project. This new ice surface, in essence, will replace the slab, the cooling slab floor, which is now starting to crumble, and we are at a point where it must be fixed, replaced, or we won't be able to have ice, essentially. So the referred items come to a total of $1.29 million. And this next screen shows a summary of both approved and recommended projects in the 2018 capital plan.
Okay, thanks, Director Walker. Appreciate the presentation. Any questions at this point? Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Director Walker. I want to make sure I understand the implications of the potential reductions in fiscal services along with the capital tax levy. So if I'm understanding, that's not going to affect our ability to do capital programs in 2018, as we've already identified those additional sources, but it might lower but if we get in the habit of doing this, it might lower our capacity of capital projects in 2019 and going forward. Is that a somewhat accurate understanding of that?
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Given. So in our capital plan, in our 4-year capital plan, the use of capital tax was fully allocated. So in fact, what we needed to do to fund that extra $1.8 million that we're pulling back from capital tax levy was replace those funding sources with something else. And we chose future expenditure reserve. So our capital plan as it exists is fully funded. In going onwards to 2019, it will be council's decision at what level capital projects should be funded using capital tax.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councilor Bressie. Director Walker, it's not lost on me. I'm certainly sure it's not lost on the rest of council that you also did double duty presenting on behalf of the city manager's service area. And so city manager, it's not lost on us that you got away without having to do a presentation that way.
Listen to me more.
But so we are now where we were predicted to be at the end of today, but we still got a lot of daylight left. And so we certainly can continue on and move into the strategic issues arising that were predicted on day 3. Maybe we'll just take, I know we just finished lunch an hour ago, but let's maybe just take a bit of a break so we can, management can reassess just how they want to get into that. We can have a bit of a discussion. So let's take a, should I call it 5? What should I call it now? 5-minute break, a 2-minute break. So we're back. So let's take a 5-minute break while we just sort of attempt to readjust our schedule, and we'll be back in just a few minutes here. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Thanks, council and management, for that bit of a break. In conference with the city manager, I think we have a bit of a recommended process for us to proceed. It'll start with what's actually in our binders, and it'll progress from there to allow council and council members some opportunity to identify some of the strategic items and things that we may have had on our lists. Bob, maybe I'll pass it to you to describe what we're going to recommend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think it is it's a process now for us to frame up deliberations. So we can take as much or as little time on any of these items as council feels comfortable. But I think the first thing we should probably talk about is the strategic capital items, what's in, what's out, what council sees as being strategic in the community. There is a slide, this one was actually in your deck, that's a first cut at what we think are some of the strategic, largely capital items, but looking at the capital items on that list, which ones are strategic, which ones should be in, which ones should be out? Is there anything else that we need to include as a strategic item on the capital list like that? Moving from that then, once we get a feel for what, from a capital perspective, what council believes needs to be in and out, we should turn our attention to the operating budget. And rather than getting down into the details of each of the items on the smorgasbord, as it was put earlier, if we try to capture strategic operating themes that are important for council. So if we can imagine that at the end of the discussion, there's going to be a number that constitutes council's read of the community's ability, tolerance for a tax rate increase, then you may be comfortable setting that as the allowable tax rate increase for 2018, but you'll want to ensure that certain strategic operating themes are preserved in the preparation of the budget that meets that funding objective. So going through and having a discussion about the strategic operating themes that you heard over the past couple of days, what you feel is important and what would need to be preserved in the budget. And then the final step really is landing on that bogey. What is the community's tolerance for a tax rate increase to support the operating activities of the organization over 2018 in meeting the strategic operating themes that have been considered to be important by council. So if that works, the slide that's currently up in front of you is where we would start.
Sure. Thanks very much, Mr. Manager. Thanks, Bob. So just for council, I'll just look to see if I'm thinking about this in a way that's acceptable to the rest of my colleagues. So when we're looking at the strategic capital items, obviously there's some very direct deliberation on what we see in front of us on this slide. Yes, no, in, out kind of things. Then there's also, I have a sense that there may be some additional things that council members might want to have a discussion about on the capital side. I'm going to recommend that we attempt to do a bit of a consensus approach to that in terms of what makes the agenda. I wouldn't expect that we're going to come to consensus on yes, no's on everything, but in terms of is that an item that's a strategic level capital issue that we need to address here today in the context of this upcoming budget, right? Or is there additional information that's required, whatever? And so we'll, if you have things that you wanted to discuss, we'll attempt to ensure that the list of items that we discuss around capital are developed by a bit of a consensus. So if you have something, we'll do a bit of a process after we've gone through the slide here of ringing in saying, okay, and I'd also like to talk about, would people be interested in that kind of approach? And we'll look around. We won't do a vote to get things in or out that way. We should be able to have a discussion and see if there's a consensus on that. As we get to the strategic operating themes, I think that's going to be fairly specific, where council members, will be asking you to identify, okay, what is from what you heard in the different scenarios, were there things that stood out that you wanted to see preserved? Were there things that stood out to you that you wanted to see addressed? Specific strategic themes in terms of operations. And so I would imagine us to be doing some voting there, because I may have seen something different in the presentations than some other council member, or I may place a different priority on something than a different council member. So we'll see. I would imagine there'd be more voting there. And then finally, when we get to the tax rate preferences, that's one where I think it's, in the end, it's a numbers game. It's a pretty much, I think, negotiation through voting. I don't think we're going to necessarily have a consensus on that, or the way that council will develop a consensus on the tax rate target that we'll give administration will be through voting. And so I would expect that in that one, we may end up having I'll move for a X% increase. Well, I can't support, and we'll vote them up and down until we get a point where we have a rate that a majority of council members can agree upon. Just in terms of, so does that give everybody a level of comfort that we'll get to vote on the stuff that's meaningful to us, and that each of us will have an opportunity to inject into the conversation at least some of the items that we wanted to see? And I'm looking around, I'm seeing some head nods. Fair enough, if we'll judge it as it goes. We'll see how we feel about that. And again, I'll just reflect, not everybody has had an opportunity to work with one of our past facilitators. Our past council members have, but we have had one in the past that was very good at reminding us all as individuals on a collective group that sometimes our issue isn't everybody's issue. And so that might be a bit of the challenge in the consensus thing. We may not find that there's a consensus that, yeah, that's something we need to talk about. And that's okay. That's the nature of being on council, right? So we'll try and negotiate this as we go, and be sensitive to the fact that we want to ensure everybody gets an opportunity to have their issues considered. At the same time, we need to acknowledge that our issue may not always be everybody else's issue. Fair enough? Okay, so we'll start with the stuff that we've got printed material on, and the slide that's in front of us. And Bob, are you going to take that one away?
Yeah, just at a high level, and everyone is so familiar with this one that I won't spend a lot of time describing it, so we can get into hearing people around the table. But it's downtown rehabilitation phases 3 and 4. The cost estimates that are in now were provided to us quite recently by ISL. This depiction includes the optional additional work to phase 3 that we can talk to in any level of detail. And it also includes a provision for an enhanced communication plan to ensure that appropriate communication occurs. Just to acknowledge what management has already heard and assimilated on the project arising from phases 1 and 2, we have undertaken to tighten up and ensure that the procurement methodologies associated with a future phasing of this project in 2018 or otherwise, that the procurement processes are such that we get the optimal likelihood of having best available pricing and highest quality crews to do the job. So that's something that management has undertaken. Second thing management acknowledges and has undertaken is, I guess, what would best be referred to as an enhanced project management presence to ensure that the city, as the owner of the project, is appropriately represented and able to make decisions that represent the owner's interest, and to liaise properly with the community, with the various contractors and subcontractors, et cetera. So the project management component has been heard very clearly by management. And the third one is, and in the project management, I should just add that there was a real concern expressed by the Downtown Business Association and various independent vendors within that association about the traffic patterns, traffic movement patterns that would arise from the execution of the project, and that I would see as a fundamental part of the project management piece. So the third and final piece then that management has taken away and will address in any future phases is the communication strategy itself. So how do we best ensure that we get good quality engineering data exchanged between the execution of the project and those affected by it, and that we introduce a higher level of what might be referred to as empathy in our communications process. So recognizing that people running restaurants and retail outlets, for example, in the downtown area need to have a communications methodology that's empathetic to what they're going through during the project itself. So with those in mind, Mr. Chairman, that item is now on the table.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Mr. Nicolay. I see Councillor Bressie. I think it's probably fair if there are some contextual questions that we may have, but if you're starting to get into a comment or an opinion, that's probably something that we should do when we have a motion on the floor. These are currently not in. The things that we see on the slide are currently not reflected in the budget, and so we need a specific intervention or by way of motion. Like I move that council include in the 2018 budget. And so so just frame it that way. If you're starting to express an opinion, save that for debate until we actually have a motion. Councillor Bressie.
Earlier this week in the Infrastructure Protected Services Committee, there was some additional data that was asked for. Do we have that yet? Is there more information we're able to look at yet?
Director Galante.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I received some information via email recently, so I can comment on that if you allow me. Okay. So one of the questions during the IPS committee was the Aquaterra contribution for phase 1 and 2 and what was involved into those numbers. So the Aquaterra contribution was not only to replace the old existing pipe with a new pipe, new material, but also involved pretty much from the sub-base, native soils, down to trenching, excavation, bedding, new pipe, similar size, backfilling, compaction up to the sub-base level again. The city paid for the upsizing of the pipe due to the ultimate increase in densities in the downtown. So just to give you an example, if we had a 400 millimeter sewer pipe and we needed a 600 millimeter sewer pipe to accommodate future densities at ultimate build-out, the city paid for the incremental cost to upsize the pipe. However, the excavation, bedding, backfilling, compaction was covered by Aquaterra. In the phase 3 and 4 estimate, there's an allocation of funding from Aquaterra of $870,000 that was initially grouped as part of the downtown project. As you may recall, for members of council that were there before, when we discussed Morrison Hirschfeld report, we considered the full BR-set zone. Then we came up with the idea of splitting in 4 phases, and then we split that in phase 1 and 2 initially. So at that time, in conversations with Aquaterra, we set aside a global amount that was pretty much consumed during phase 1 and 2, and only $870,000 is remaining. So Aquaterra total contribution for phase 1 and 2 is about $3.3 million, 1.3 in water component and $2 million on the sewer component. So 3.3 million is Aquaterra contribution, and the city contribution was $890,000. That's for the upsizing of the infrastructure. For phases 3 and 4, the total component for water and sanitary sewer is about $5.2 million. And the funding remaining from Aquaterra is $870,000. So the approach that the city may take if the project is approved is to connect with Aquaterra, because they prepare the business plan every 2 years. So they have a 2017-2018 business plan. They have a longer term capital plan. But if they need to set aside extra funding for the phase 3 and 4 components of the project, after approval here, the city will need to approach Aquaterra if that is the desire to increase the level of contribution. Other question that was asked during the IPS committee was the cost differential for parking lanes and sidewalks for different types of materials. So for parking lanes, we considered 3 different materials. The existing design is calling for paving stone, as for phase 1 and 2. So in order to keep consistency with the theme on phase 1 and 2. If we go ahead with the same material, pave and stone, for phase 3, it's about $600,000 versus concrete, that is $300,000, pretty much half the cost of concrete, and asphalt, just regular asphalt, about $130,000. So global numbers, 600 for paving stone, 300,000 for concrete, 130,000 for regular blacktop asphalt. This is on the parking lanes.
Director Galante, sorry to interrupt. I just want to understand. So is that across both phases 3 and 4?
That's for phase
total.
3. I can give you the total if you want for phase 3 and 4. It's a global number.
Yeah.
Will be easier. Okay. So the total, if we consider paving stones, current materials, for phase 3 and 4 is $1.2 million. For concrete is 670,000, and for asphalt 261,000. A significant difference between the different materials. This is for parking lanes. For the sidewalks, we ran a calculation comparing 2 different types of materials, paving stones again, and concrete. So in total, for phases 3 and 4, if we do paving stones on the sidewalks, the total cost is $1.8 million. And if we do concrete, the total cost is $1 million. The last question that was asked during the IPS committee meeting was the split, global split in percentage-wise between surface versus underground for the project. So it's pretty much similar, the numbers for phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. For phases 1 and 2 that already built, the split is surface work about 65% of the cost, and underground work 35%. And I will explain what is inside each. So for surface work, we consider removals and road work, so removal and replacement of the surface infrastructure, sidewalks, curb and gutter, all the road work, landscaping and furnishings, and street lights. Also, traffic accommodation and mobilization. This is inside surface, and that is 65% of the cost. Under underground cost, that includes storm sewer, sanitary sewer, and the water mains. So pretty much if you want to split this at sub-base level down, kind of down to 6 meters, that was kind of the depth of the excavation. And then the surface work is everything what we can see pretty much on the road. So roads, curb and gutter, sidewalks, or all the urban furniture, street light, benches, cabinets, etc. The estimate that we receive for phases 3 and 4 is calling exactly for the same numbers, about 64% surface work and 36% underground. So this is the information that was requested and recently calculated. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Galante. Councillor Bressi, I think that handles most of the items. I see Councillor Clayton also in the queue here. Councillor Clayton?
Sorry, I do have one additional question. Sure. Or actually, you know what? I'll hold on to it for now.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I wanted to make a motion here to move this item further into the discussion. So in essence, to table the discussion of this item, only in allowing council an opportunity to see what other sort of opportunities are based on our sort of capital discussions. So my motion will be to table this item to, and I don't know where we want to
well, a couple things.
Yep.
We may have other people that have questions.
Yeah.
That haven't had a chance to have their questions answered. So before we do a tabling motion, I'd want to make sure that we at least gave everybody equal opportunity to have that. Second, it sounds as though, and the city manager had his hand up, so he may have a comment, but it sounds as though the intent may be because it's subject to funding strategy. I can appreciate that may weigh in decision in some respects. That also maybe straddles the line between where we give administration the direction to figure out a way to get the projects done. We want to get them done within the tax rate that we set at the end. So just to be conscious of that, if we start to get into telling administration how to fund each thing, that could present some challenges. We get that overall opportunity through the tax rate, but that's not a determination, a deciding of the issue. But Mr. City Manager.
Actually, that is a very valid point. That we don't need to be cognizant of the funding source. We have capacity in a number of areas, but I can see where freeing up capacity in some areas may alter the decisions for any of these capital projects. My comment was going to be that we may not need to do tabling motions while we're in discussion and dialogue. That if people want to just hold that in abeyance while we look at some other stuff, we may be able to be a little less formal on this in order to get through it.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. But so maybe it's the appetite of the group, or however you want to phrase that. But I think this affects our long-term debt, and so overall, I'd like to see how the other discussions lay out.
Yeah, and completely fair. We're really talking about this entire as one chunk right now, and that's some of the discussion that I think we need to have as well. But I do see Councillor Plott in the queue. Let's maybe go through, have a bit of an introduction of the issue or the item, and in this case, I guess if we're talking about the physical part right now, or the downtown in general, maybe focusing on the physical. Let's get our questions asked and answered, and then we decide kind of where we need to go from there. Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. With respect to that, I'll try to stick to just the Aquaterra piece for now, and maybe come back to some of the other stuff later on. So if I heard Director Galante correctly, we paid $890,000, and Aquaterra paid $3.3 million in phases 1 and 2. Phases 3 and 4 are $5.2 million for the pipes, and we have $870,000 allocated from Aquaterra. So there's a pretty big funding shortfall to me for Aquaterra's contribution from the last phases to this phase. And out of respect to that, I don't know how we can, how we move forward with saying this without knowing what Aquaterra's contribution is going to be, because I feel like, obviously if we use similar numbers, they're probably looking at $4 million for their portion, not $870. So we're about $3.3 million less that we would have to take on as debt. Which obviously I think for the citizens of Grande Prairie, that's the hope, is the less debt, the better for us, and it allows us to use our debt for maybe other things down the road. So I would have a hard time, I guess, at this time supporting any sort of motions or anything until we figured out the Aquaterra piece first. And I guess I'll leave it at that with Aquaterra for now, because I've got stuff on some of the brickwork and everything else. But that was just my comments on Aquaterra. I don't know how we move forward until we find out where they're at to pay their share with it.
Yeah, fair comment. I don't know, if Director Galante, if you have a response to that in terms of what approach administration management would take with that discussion with Aquaterra.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you know, the cost estimate has been received pretty much last week. So these are very fresh numbers. The 90% design was received on Friday, and the associated cost estimate is a Class C estimate. So without having solid information in our hands, it was very difficult to approach Aquaterra to start conversations about how they can implement an amendment on the business plan that currently is in place and approved until the end of 2018 to adjust those numbers as well. So it's a sequential order that we consider prudent to follow, present the project to Council during budget deliberations, and if Council desires to go ahead, then the next step will be to formally approach Aquaterra with these numbers and try to get an amendment to the capital plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager.
Just recognizing that in view of the late-breaking nature of this information, Director Galante and I have not had a chance to caucus on this. So if you don't mind, we'll kind of think out loud with each other as well. A couple of issues come to mind. First of all, the mechanism for Council to go ahead and approve, if we were inclined to do this project, but wanted to ensure that there was an appropriate contribution from the utility. we could easily say that council approves the project subject to an appropriate capital contribution from Aquaterra, and appropriate then would have to be determined through a council approval at a subsequent meeting. So on the strength of that, we would take the cost estimates forward to Aquaterra, talk to them about what their capital contribution would be, and then come back and say, is this appropriate? So no problem in doing that kind of decision making. In terms of Aquaterra's business plan and how that might be an impediment to execution, I'm a little less sensitive to that than Director Galante is, although I do defer to his relationship with Aquaterra. You've had several more discussions with them than I have. Typically in the operation of a utility, it's a requirement that if we've got a project that needs to be done, we own the utility or we're a major owner in the utility, it will become a priority for them, and they'll execute it in a direction that is required by their customers. I don't want to say emphatically that we will tell Aquaterra when to do a project, but we're the customer and we're paying for the work, and when that's our utility mechanism to get our community served with deep utilities. So I don't think the business planning cycle of Aquaterra ought to be considered a hard impediment. More likely is they're not going to give us a cost estimate until they can see the veracity of the estimates that we put in and how they can come up with what their relative contribution would be.
I see Councillor Clayton's in the queue as well. I just want to say on the Aquaterra issue with respect to downtown, or sort of this facet of the downtown project. I think it's also issue raised by Councillor Bressie at the committee. We all need to recognize that it's still in play. I don't think there's been a determination made about whether or not this kind of infrastructure, should the city choose to fund it, would qualify for dividends. And so there is, as the owner of Aquaterra, we have the opportunity to put in capital into their infrastructure. When it's turned over, they own that infrastructure. The city does receive, after a couple-year waiting period, a 5% dividend return in perpetuity on that asset that we turned over. And so that issue is in play. So it could end. The city has made use of that publicly. Everybody's, the community's aware of it, on the West Side Trunk, where the city made a $4 million investment into that infrastructure. Aquaterra built the infrastructure, and it will, in perpetuity, return a 5% rate of return to the municipality. Now, without getting into whether it's technically possible or not, and you know, this is probably city manager and Director Walker's area, if our cost of capital is 2.5% on borrowing, and our rate of return on invested capital into Aquaterra is 5%, it may make sense for Aquaterra to put in no capital and the city to take that on, because it would actually be cash flow positive to us. Those are the level of discussions that administration will have to have at what's the strategic approach to financing if council chooses to go ahead with the project. So just that's an important nuance, I think, that we need to acknowledge. Dr. Galante?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In addition to your comments, that's correct. The source of funding to attract these dividends is capital tax, so we cannot use grant money to pay for this infrastructure. To be capital tax. Okay, so
grant money. It has to. It cannot be no cost capital, is my understanding.
Correct. Yes. So we can't.
That is not no cost.
Correct. Yes.
Can be debt though.
Correct. Yes.
Can.
Yeah. So again, there's a fair level of nuance that's important around this specific issue, and that's why we may want to consider it at more of the, you know, go no go in terms of the priority of the project in relation to the community, and then and base our decision on that. Now I've got a couple of council members in the queue here. Councillor Clayton, you've been waiting patiently.
You're given a couple things. So the potential contribution for phase 3 and 4 from Aquaterra at $870,000. The portion of the project, at $870,000 that they have is part of the 5.2 million, correct? So the 5.2 million, we can earn 5% on potentially. The 5.2 being 20% of the overall of $30 million. so that everybody's aware, obviously we're only making money on the stuff that Aquaterra does. So, the 5 million. Back to the other point in regards to the business plan that Mr. Nicolay referenced. Director Galante, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Aquaterra will have to have a unanimous shareholders approval on the business plan. So we could do all this work, approve this project, agree that, it makes more sense to do capital debt on this project, speculating that we're getting 5% on the $5 million, goes to business plan level with our regional partners, and they don't support the business plan, and this project won't happen.
No, I just want, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, if the city chose to fund it, like you said, the city chose to fund it, and we turn it over, they're obligated to accept infrastructure or capital that we invest into the utility. So it wouldn't change their capital plan, and it wouldn't be subject to shareholder approval. Shareholders, and the county's done this, the city's done this, have the ability to inject capital into Aquaterra, and they're obligated to accept it under a certain range of terms, which I believe that this would.
So we'll make 5% on the 5 million, but they would have no, they're putting no contribution in at that point. Just we're getting the 5% back.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Minhas.
Thank you, Mayor Bill. My question, just clarification, I could be wrong. It's my understanding, if city invests the money into the sewer and water, we get preferred shares. So that way we get benefit on the both sides. We get the dividend, plus we get preferred share. We spend $5 million to do the sewer. Is that true?
I don't know about the preferred shares. It's
It's not preferred, it's a B or something,
Class
C share,
Yeah, yeah.
class B or something. Yeah.
That's how you get your dividend.
Yeah. Councillor Palat.
Just moving off, maybe off the Aquaterra piece a little bit. Director Galante, if I'm correct again on this, using the 65% kind of surface number on a phase 3, we're saying it's about $10 million for surface and about $5 million, just approximate numbers on the underground side of it. So on the surface side, when I look at the paving stones and the sidewalks, I'm saying 600,000 was the paving stones for the parking lanes, and half of the 1.8 million for the whole project. So about 1.5 million would be kind of phase 3. I'm having a hard time understanding where the other $8.5 million goes. I know there's a base there, and I know there's some landscaping requirements, but there's a gap, and I don't want to get in the weeds because I know we talked about this at the Protective Services Committee meeting, but I guess in my head, I would have thought that the stuff that we can physically see, if we're just seeing base up, would have been a lot more than 15% of the spending in that area.
Director Conte.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The split is based on existing theme, so continuing with the existing theme for phase 1 and 2 into phases 3 and 4. So paving stones on sidewalks and parking lanes, so we have to use those numbers in order to be consistent on the split. If the decision, for example, is to change to just asphalt, which is significantly cheaper on the surface, that will alter the split. Okay. Other items like traffic accommodation, mobilization, electrical stuff, shallow utilities, that is pretty much specific to the project. We have detailed cost estimates with hundreds of items that, I don't have that information here, but can be provided later on. But we have a very detailed cost estimate. We just group these items into, surface and underground, just for simplicity for now.
And I guess maybe I'm not phrasing this properly. If we're saying $15 million for phase 3 downtown rehab, and about, again, 65%, so about 10 million is for surface work. The numbers that we got it's about $600,000 for the phase 3 for the paving stones on the where the cars would park on top of, and a number of 1.8 million for phases 3 and 4 for the sidewalk side. So I maybe I'm wrong on the sidewalk side. Maybe so am I guessing it's 900,000 if we kind of split it into 2 phases, because the number of 1.8 I think was just for phases 3 and 4, was it not, or was that just phase 3?
Sorry, a couple of the city manager wants to get in here too. Just in terms of the split, I think in surface, what we're defining as surface, setting aside that mobilization, it sounds like, is 100% allocated to the surface work, which I would suggest there need to be mobilization and traffic accommodation. But that's, so that aside, primary electrical, replacement of street lighting, right? Like all the street lights, secondary electrical, landscaping, vegetation materials, soil cells. So when we say surface, I'm imagining that many of those are in that. So it's not surface treatments in terms of the layer that you actually set a car on or your feet on, but everything that we can physically see, benches, you know. So
and that's exactly what I'm thinking is it's a $10 million surface number, with really 1.4 of that being sidewalk and where the cars park. So now there's $8.5 million to actually the road surfacing, the asphalt on the road,
Right.
the base, and landscaping. And so that's where I guess in my head I'm going, boy, that seems like a big gap to have 15% being there and 85% being in base work and a road surfacing and landscaping. So it makes me want to layer into another question of how much is the landscaping portion and the pretty little ball boats and some of those things maybe that we're doing, because I'm wondering if there's an opportunity. I've been driving up and down the last phase, and one of the things that hits me is maybe we put it all too shiny too quick, and more thinking maybe in 5 or 10 years there's an option to put down some of the nicer street amenities on the road and not all do it 100% up front now. But I don't know what that cost would equate to, because I just, the $8.5 million, I'm having a hard time understanding where that would go, I guess.
I can appreciate the challenge without sort of having that entire level of detail. Dr. Grande?
Yeah, thank you. So again, what I can present at this time with this level of detail, and this calculation was provided last night, again, so they're very fresh numbers, is the grouping. So under general category is traffic accommodation and mobilization, that there is an impact on the whole project, because the traffic accommodation plan is impacting everything, the sewer pipe, the water pipe, but somehow we need to group items, right, for simplicity. So under the surface work category, the 65%, we have the traffic accommodation, full mobilization, removals, and road work. So we need to peel off all the roads, all the curb and gutters, everything, and dispose or recycle as much as we can. Then we have to reconstruct. It's a full road reconstruction. And if you see the capital plan under the full reconstruction item, the cost per linear meter of road is pretty significant. So this is full road reconstruction in this case. Landscaping and furnishings, so all the urban furniture, traffic signals, benches, trees, cells, irrigation system, electrical system, street lights, everything is included as part of surface. And underground, the only thing we have is at sub-base level, so native soil elevation, down between 3 to 6 meters, that's the depth of the excavation. So it's pretty much bulk excavation, placing the pipes, servicing to the buildings, service connections, bedding materials, and recompaction, backfilling up to sub-base level. So it's pretty much bulk work done with big machines. So the unit cost is less significant. All the labor, the surface work is very labor intensive. That's a little bit of an explanation about why this is split. Right? And we have a very, very detailed cost estimate with all the items. So.
And I can appreciate it was about, I think 2 days ago we sat in the other room here talking about this, so I can appreciate you even have this much to us at this point. But it makes me come back to then, is the $5.2 million number we're putting Aquaterra's portion around really the right number? Because mobilization, the dirt in, dirt out, all these other things that are maybe surface factors might not be the complete picture for Aquaterra. I'm worried maybe we're missing part of the bigger picture of if Aquaterra, if the pipes failed tomorrow, would have to dig up the road. They'd have to replace the dirt. They'd have to compact the dirt. They'd have to get the road ready for paving. So I'm not convinced that the 5.2 million number that we're maybe throwing out now captures the full amount that Aquaterra should really be responsible for.
See the city manager?
Just on that point, Mr. Mayor, I think the only way that we're going to be able to crack that nut at this point is to talk about an appropriate contribution from Aquaterra. It is admirable that Director Galante has been able to generate the kind of information that he already has. At an even broader level, this is a $30 million project. We've attributed $5.2 million to the water and sanitary sewer infrastructure. If you total phases 3 and 4, we've attributed $3 million to the sidewalk and parking lanes if we use pavers. So the resulting, or the residual $21.7 million is unaccounted for. It's a big number. This is a very large project. The degree to which Aquaterra should be contributing to this is something that has both a strategic component, if we've got an opportunity for a return through dividend, and a practical component in terms of what you might expect a utility to practically cover in a project that needs to be done prior to failure. So if it is an issue related to Aquaterra's contribution, we can solve that by ensuring that there is a contribution that's appropriate and adequate in the judgment of council. The bigger issue is really, it's a $30 million project in downtown. Will take a couple of years to do. Are we right to do that right now? Is this the time for us to go ahead with that project?
And I guess that's where I'm hoping to try to find out. Yeah, I know we can't find this out today, but let's hypothetically say Aquaterra's portion is $8 million. I mean, realistically, we can borrow $16 million if they give us 5%, and we're almost at a wash of what it's costing us for the debt serviceability of that money, because we're getting double dipped on what we pay for interest and what we're going to get as a dividend. I'm just having a hard. I'd love to see this project go ahead. I mean, I was in the trenches lots of downtown, and when I was campaigning, I'd love to see this go ahead. I just really want to make sure that we're getting the right dollar amount from Aquaterra, and I don't know how we move this forward in a timely fashion to make sure if we do want to go ahead with this, and we're RFPing and we're trying to get this done in March so that we can have a start in the right time of the year so we can get this done in the construction season.
So when we're getting close to, I want to see this go ahead, but that's getting into opinion, and we don't have, nobody's actually said that we're going ahead because nobody's made a motion, right? So, but in answer to that a bit, that's why we have, terminology like subject to. If they're at some point, so this is our first, budget where we've got this, if there's a discussion that says, move that phase whatever be included, subject to appropriate or, acceptable, apportionment between the utility and the city or a strategy, like that kind of thing. That subject to tells administration, put it in, go away, do the work, come back and confirm with us that you've done something that we can accept. Okay. So we have that ability. We have a number of other people in the queue. Again, council, this is good. We need to be able to have this dialogue. And at the same time, let's make sure that we're getting information that increases our understanding of the project so that we're getting ourselves into a position where we can start to make some decisions. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Gibbon. This is actually a question for Director Walker. In regards to the debenture that we may or may not undertake, $33.25 million. What would our annual operational, cost be on that project, on that scale of a borrow?
I work for finance now.
Oh, right on.
So I have the calculation here. So calculation is provided based on the following assumptions. Okay, so it's a 30-year amortization period, and the rate is 3.34%. That is our rate that we borrow currently, 3.34%. So for phase 3, that is $15 million borrowing. In order to service the debt per year is $800,000. So in total for phases 3 and 4 is $1.6 million to service the debt in 30 years.
And that's on top of what we're already borrowing?
That is in order to service the debt. Okay. It's $1.6 million per year.
Okay. So $1.6 million per year.
Right, correct.
Over 30 years.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I see a couple other council members in the queue. Just I'll I'm going to jump in to ask a question that I had, just so I'm not doing it towards the end. Director Grande, is the optional addition to Phase 3, does it, if it doesn't go ahead, does it have any impact on the sort of Phase 3, Phase 4? Like, is it truly optional? And would there be any other costs that would be associated with not moving forward with that portion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The optional component is block north of 100 Street, north of 100 Avenue, along 100 Street. Can be done at any time in the future. There's no design right now. We base the numbers as an order of magnitude based on previous cost from different phases, but can be done at any time in the future.
And then the other question that I had was with respect to Phase 4, the timeline that administration shared at committee this week identified that Phase 4 wouldn't likely be going ahead in the 2018 budget. Is that, or sorry, in the 2018 calendar year? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. The physical space is very limited to put all the different crews. If you have seen Phase 1 and 2 construction, sometimes it's like a ballet. And all the movements on the machines and the crews coming and going. So we are really restricted physically on site. And with the short construction season, we consider it really prudent to split the project on Phase 3 in one construction season, Phase 4 in a different construction season.
So then my question, I guess, for management would be, if we're talking right now about reviewing and approving or setting a 2018 budget, is there a need for council today or in this discussion to make a decision on Phase 4 if it's not going to go ahead in 2018 anyhow? Like, was there a logic or a reason where they intended to be tendered together? Because I didn't necessarily see that. And again, I thought I saw in that timeline that there was a Phase 4 tendering, and so I just want to understand what the intent was around what management was recommending to us, because I guess if we're putting undue pressure on ourselves, or if we're saying $30 million of borrowing is a significant amount, help me understand whether we need to make that decision today, or whether there's at least a portion of that decision that we can consider and potentially take a different approach. Director Grande?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we consider economies of scale and assurance to attract multiple bidders because of a large tender, it makes sense to put two phases together in one single tender package. We may have a more competitive prices and potentially construction companies from the region, out of province, bidding in the project. If we go ahead with Phase 3 alone, the total amount is pretty much split in half. However, not necessarily we need to do this in one shot. We can do two tender packages, two completely separated projects in 2018 or 19, and then continue. So physically, in order to connect utilities under a constructability point of view, it's totally doable to split the project in two different phases.
Okay. And thank you for that. And I just, the city manager had the timeline that I was referring to. It does actually lay out, January of 2019 is the tender award for Phase 4. And so that, I'm glad that I wasn't misremembering or misunderstanding. So I just would like council to recognize that that's a consideration as well. We don't necessarily need to feel that there's undue pressure to do a $30 million chunk here today. And in terms of the level of interest that a $15 million project would attract, the last couple of phases were only $20 million. So in terms of scale, I would imagine it may still attract a fair amount of interest. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'm curious about potential grants with senior levels of government, and I realize that their decision-making is often murky and we can't forecast the future, but maybe looking at past practices, if there are potential grants we could apply for in the future, is there a danger being shovels in the ground with this project, or can you generally get those grants when you're mid-project? I'm wondering, by waiting a couple of years, is there potential of seeing grant money from senior levels of government, or is that a non-factor in this?
Director Lante?
Thank you, Mayor Even. The federal grants usually flow via the province, And for this type of construction projects, MSI has been historically the grant to apply because of the criteria and the volume and the amount of work. So although we have access to federal gas tax and some other grants that may show up sporadically, like metropolitan grants or Alberta collaboration funds that come and go, MSI has been our trusted, solid grant to fund this type of projects. MSI is safe, I would say, until 2019. There's a full review going on a municipal sustainability initiative. And that's one of the reasons that we were very cautious on recommending this, because the MSI allocation for 2018 has been used in phase 1 and 2. And the 2019 allocation is considered safe. But beyond that, we need to be cautious with MSI as well. Correct. Yes, and we have limited funding available, so it's $14 million per year, the full allocation, and we use MSI funding for other programs under the capital plan. For example, our overlay and road rehabilitation program consumes about $8 million, $7 million per year of MSI, so not necessarily 100% of the allocation can be used for this project. Thank you.
See, Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. I appreciate you kind of breaking out the phases 3 and 4 being an option, because that was something that's been weighing on me. I'm concerned that there could be, like everybody says, like pull the band-aid and get it gone, but that we get through phase 3 and then there's this whole construction fatigue hits in and that we're locked into a phase 4. So I appreciate that we have the option to maybe look at doing multiple phases. I know that, again, it was 2 days ago we got this, and so there's one more layer of detail. I just want to come back to, I'm curious about what the costs of, like, driving by in front of the farmer's market yesterday, walking around and looking at these, the nice little concrete setups we're putting there that say, downtown, they're beautiful. If we can find out a cost of breaking those out as well, I would love to see us have this great downtown, but I'd love to see us somehow 5 or 7 years down the road almost do another little, hey, we did this as well. I just look at it from a development community. You would never put all of your, put all of your best outfits on the same day. And so we're going to, I'm worried that maybe we could look at layering in some of the beautification of downtown that actually might have a bigger draw and kind of almost reinvent it again in 5 or 7 or 10 years. They're above surface line items. They wouldn't affect the grading and the subgrade materials. If we could find out what some of those dollar amounts would be on a phase 3, phase 4 thing. I'm just having a struggle with the appetite for debt. And so I'm just wondering if that could be layered in later on. And if we could find some numbers on that as well.
Director Galante.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I need to spend time reviewing the detailed cost estimate. Again, it's a complex estimate with dozens of line items. But for sure it's achievable, and it will take some work, but we can group categories and potentially delay some of the upgrades or phase the upgrades, cosmetic or visual, I would say, on the surface level, right, over a period of time, instead of doing it everything in one shot.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Conte. Whether or not we want administration to do that kind of work, there may be a debate around that. And additional perspectives. Councillor Thiessen.
Thanks again, Mayor Bill. Director Galante, in our long-term capital plan, we have downtown rehab and streetscape upgrades, capital tax and MSI monies. Is that for phases 1 and 2, or is that prescriptive for the next phases 3 and 4?
Councillor Thyssen, are you talking 2018 allocation of the capital?
Yes.
This is the total amount that has been set aside for the budget cycle for downtown enhancement. And initially we discussed the full BRZ project, and if I remember correctly, it was about $140 million. And then we went down into more details for phase 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So this is the total allocation to the end of the budget cycle that can be used now for phase 3 and 4.
Oh, so it hasn't already been used for phase 1 and 2, and
What is in the budget right now?
yeah, it says capital tax 1 million and MSI 4 million. In the prior year, we put 5 million, and I know that the last council made a concerted effort to put 5 million aside every year for this project. I just want to clarify for myself and for this council that this money is going for phases 1 and 2 to complete that job, rather than going to phases 3 and 4. Because if it is going to phases 3 and 4, then that's $5 million potentially less that this council may be looking at spending or borrowing.
Grande?
Mr. Mayor, the funded component that we have available is about 2.7 million. However, a portion of that has been awarded for the design and construction supervision. That's for phase 1 and 2. Okay. So for phase 3 and 4, Susan, do you have the available funding? Nothing. Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much.
Mr. City Manager?
Fools rush in, but just if we're in the process of a complex decision, maybe to throw another variable into the mix. When we talk about taking a $30 million project and amortizing it over 30 years at our current cost of capital and generating about a $1.7 million annual debt servicing, the intention of that project is to increase the developability, if I can invent words, of downtown. So right now, downtown's tax base is roughly generating about $4.5 million a year in tax revenue for us. So in order for us to imagine the downtown project resulting in subsequent development that wouldn't otherwise occur, and think about how much increased assessment revenue would have to come from the downtown in order to pay for that debt servicing, it would be about 30 to 35% increase in the assessment revenue from the downtown core over the period. Recognizing that when increased assessment base occurs, it occurs in perpetuity. So it goes on beyond the 30-year term of the venture. So if the project had an imagined objective of increasing development in the downtown core and creating this increased tax base downtown, that's how much roughly it would have to increase in order to completely pay for the debt.
Councillor Platt?
During the Protective Services Committee meeting, we had talked to Mr. Leclay's point on that, what the potential implications could look like in the next 5 to 10 years of revenue. If we did see, like, between the Germain, the York Hotel site, potentially the park, there's some other tracts of land. I know, again, that was 2 days ago, but is there anything coming forward with that to show kind of like what we feel in the next 5 or 10 years is a realistic number that we'd have on revenue? And I can respect it's a longer term thing, and probably there's a point at 15 years or 20 years that we actually probably are on the positive side of this. I'm just wondering where it looks like to where we're potentially on the positive side of the debt borrowing versus the revenue piece.
Aside from sort of a thumbnail answer to that, no, there's not a lot more analysis that's occurring right now. It really is the amount of increased assessment base revenue from downtown arising from the fact that we've paid attention to the development of downtown and increased the infrastructure to accommodate that development would have to be about 30 to 35%. A more comprehensive evaluation would also take into account things like if the development of a vibrant downtown slows the urban sprawl of the growth of the community out into increasingly remote areas from the downtown. How long does that delay the next fire hall that has to be built? How long does it delay the next kilometer of roadway that has to be maintained because we're containing people within the downtown area? There is a much more robust financial analysis that could be done to answer that question, but really at the end of the day, it's that kind of imagining that we have to be able to do to determine if this is a good investment. And I would point out that the assessment base growth in perpetuity is a pretty valuable attribute for downtown, and the debt will pass and the assessment base growth won't.
I'm not sure. I made a comment earlier about some of the extra beautification things, and I can respect that it's we don't have that information today. So I'm not sure if it's something you'd like me to ask for a motion so that we can see that we get that from administration, so that we can see how much that line item is. Because I again feel that could be an impact on how much we're borrowing today, and maybe putting off to 5 or 10 years, and it's a rebranding again, even in 5 or 10 years, to another re-enhancement almost to downtown. So were you looking, I maybe misunderstood, were you looking for a motion about that, or is that something we can ask administration for?
Yeah, and so I'll look to management and just confirm what I'm about to say is that, I think that level of detail of information that does already exist is something that could be circulated to council. I don't think we need a motion to do that, and administration can just figure out the right way to present it or to share it. I don't want a binder that's this thick, but and so maybe that could be shared. But I think it exists. We're not necessarily asking Councillor Platt. I don't think you're asking administration to develop anything new, but essentially to circulate at a high order the information that does exist, and so that's fair. I don't think we need a motion for that. Councillor Minhas.
Thank you, Mayor Bill Given. My question raised now, the first and second phase, I don't know, cost was maybe 20 million, 25, but how much debt we got and how much we got grant. Then same time I'll probably give the answer how much Equator or we city did that sewer and water. That'll give us, I'm still struggling with the Wade plots situation between 8.5 million gap. How did that will give us maybe some kind of idea?
Director Glante.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Phase 1 and 2 of the project was pretty much funded via MSI. However, there was some conversion to capital tax in order to get shares from Aquaterra. I don't know if the finance department has the a million. So $1 million out of the 20, roughly, was converted from MSI grant funding to capital tax in order to get shares and corresponding dividends from Aquaterra, but it was pretty much funded via a grant.
Oh.
So there's no deficit financing in phase 1 and 2?
There's no deficit.
Zero borrowing for phase 1 and 2.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. So went and turned off my own mic and then started to talk. That was sort of backwards. We can move on, discuss other items. We could have motions to deal with this item, and we're still ahead of schedule. So we're okay, right? This bit will be a bit painful for all of us as we go, okay, so what are we supposed to do here? But I think that's the way that it's intended to be. We don't need to feel antsy about that. And at the same time, at some point, we do need to find some way to move forward because this is a significant item that will have bearing on the development of our budget. Sorry, Mr. City Manager, would have a comment on that? I've got some others in the queue.
Yeah, on that point, if I may, Mr. Mayor, it wouldn't be problematic from a management perspective. There's really two issues that I'm seeing at play here. One is whether the community wants to go ahead with the project, and two is, if so, how do we execute? How do we fund? How do we get partners? To what degree do we engage beautification versus basic utility work? From a management perspective, if we need to get at the community answer first, it wouldn't be problematic for this council to say that you approve, for example, you approve the project subject to an appropriate contribution from utility, from the Aquaterra utility, and appropriate can be something that can be determined by council at a later date, and subject to a detailed execution plan that elaborates on the various options in terms of the level of beautification that occurs in the execution. And that report would be something that would come back to council before there's money spent on the project. It would have to be done relatively quickly, so we would be then able to engage Aquaterra in getting at what their contribution might be and whether they could accommodate the work. And we would go through this process of examining the estimates that Director Galante already has in order to get at that. But it would at least allow us to answer the community question and the execution question separately.
Thanks very much, Mr. City Manager. So I see a few others in the queue. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. If it would be appropriate, I'd like to make that motion, but still open for debate too.
Sure. Absolutely, I would almost be thankful for a motion so that we can focus our discussion. And so I will ask you to be specific on what it is that you're moving so that we know what we're discussing and debating.
So I'd like to make a motion to go ahead with phase 3 of the downtown rehab project with subject to Aquaterra's funding input in this budget, and possibly a second motion to come back with possible design changes and costs
So
with the surface area.
Thanks, Councillor Toole. I think so. Thank you. I think the first, certainly in order. I think we may need a bit more specificity on design changes, because that's pretty broad, and administration would go away and go, well, what do you mean by that? You know, yeah.
Basically, asphalt versus concrete versus paving stones versus curb and gutter.
So the administration gave us that information, I think, and so this is good. We can craft this together
discuss it
as a group. And so, so the motion is direct administration to include phase 3 of the downtown rehab in the 2018 budget, subject to an appropriate contribution with respect to Aquaterra contribution, right? So we would see that back. And maybe we could say inclusive of X in design, because there were a couple of different, there were 6 different alternatives, and some of them I support and some of them I don't. So, and I think that's probably the same for all of us. And so we may need to say inclusive of which design alternatives. And so there were 2 major categories: parking lanes and sidewalks.
So do we want to make a second motion, or include that all in one?
I think include it all in one, and include it all in one. And so so in that motion, inclusive of X for parking lanes.
I will go with
your options being paving stone, concrete, or asphalt.
I'll go with asphalt.
Okay, inclusive of asphalt parking lanes, and on sidewalks, the X, the variable is paving stones or concrete.
I will go with paving stones. Paving stones.
Okay. So that's specific, right? There were 5 total. So 5 total options on those 2 different areas. Councillor Toole's motion identifies that we would include it in the 2018 budget. What the design alternatives would be included in that for sidewalks and parking lanes, and that the entire project going ahead would be subject to this dialogue about the water sewer contribution or approach strategy. Right? Is that clear?
And I am welcome to friendly amendments.
Councillor Toole, your intent was specific to phase 3. Is that
phase 3 only? And move. Yeah.
Okay. So that motion, do we all understand it first? Well, we'll make sure that we all have the same understanding of the motion, and then that gives us something specific to debate or potentially amend or whatever, right? But that way we know that we're all talking about the same thing, and that management, administration has heard us the same way. Terry, do you have that motion? Were you able to capture it? Oh, Arlene. Okay. Yeah, she's a better one. Okay.
So I captured it in this way. Council direct administration include the downtown rehabilitation phase 3 in the 2018 budget, subject to appropriate funding levels by Aquaterra, and to include asphalt parking lanes and paving stones on sidewalks.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's correct. Director Grande.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a word of caution that any changes on the design at this time may jeopardize the tender package. We're approaching end of the year, so we're running against the clock in terms of finalizing the design that is at 90% right now, getting the final estimates, and preparing a variety of documents that need to be incorporated in the tender package. Because a report to council takes some time, just need to be cautious on timelines. Thank you.
Mr. City Manager?
If I was understanding the motion correctly, though, the design we would have our marching orders on the redesign right now. So ISL could go out and start doing the redesign based on asphalt parking and leave the design for the sidewalks as it is. The only unknown is whether we're actually going to execute or not, which would be dependent on whether there's an appropriate level of contribution from Aquaterra. So we would continue to do this redesign, knowing that the project could still be turned down for 2018. It shouldn't delay our engineering work, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, I think I would concur with that assessment because when council discusses and debates this, there is a design change that's proposed there, and so I appreciated Director Galante's. So the subsurface preparation for the parking lanes will be different, and they'll have to. So there will be some deletions, and there will be some extra engineering work that would go into that. That would have to be done before the package is prepared and ready for tender, which is, I think, accurate. Yeah. Okay. So there's a queue here. We all understand the motion. Are we comfortable to discuss and debate that motion? We should be on the merits of that motion now, and this is where we get a chance to say, I think that, and here's what I care about. Right, Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. I just respect to Director Galante. I don't want to put words in Mrs. Donnelly's mouth, but I think when we discussed this at committee, she didn't think the design change that Mr. O'Toole's motion would have any implications on the timing of the RFP. I thought that was okay, so I'm hoping I'm not off on that. I support that we're not going with the asphalt or to going to the asphalt paving lanes, mostly out of hope that they're going to be covered with cars all the time because downtown's going to work and it's going to be busy down there, so they're going to be covered with cars anyways. The one other potential amendment I would like to make to this, though, is breaking out the next level of detail of what the extra surface things that we could put off for later on are as well. Because if we can defer those for time, I would just like to make an amendment that that committee or council, administration comes back to council with a number on some of the street surface beautifications and some line items that we could deliberate on at a future date and maybe not approve those today. If I can make that amendment.
That's a difficult amendment to make because it really, because we don't have a cost or it's the overall project making. So it's basically another subject to that may change the entire thing. That's a bit challenging.
I guess I'm not, if there's surface work, they shouldn't, maybe I'm missing something, but if this is surface work items,
this is the entire.
It's a beautification piece though, but we've there's a motion on that we're going from paving stone to asphalt on parking lanes. I guess I'm just asking for one more layer there of what the cost, if we can find out the cost difference of all the extra things that we're deploying on the surface outside of the sidewalks, not the benches, but the beautification things that you see in front of the farmers market now.
So do you mean the planters?
The planters and those what the cost of those would be, because I would support that we didn't do those now and we did those at a later time, because I think there's an opportunity to rebrand downtown in 10 or 15 years without putting that on as debt today. And it gives us another layer of branding downtown at another time. It's going to look incredibly better or different than it has now with just going to pavers and switching the streetscape as what we're proposing. I think we could add that layer later on.
Okay, so that's a specific design intention. I think that's probably a more complex change than pavers to asphalt in drive lanes, because there are electrical conduit that runs to all those. There are irrigation systems that run to all those, and so the design consideration probably has a greater impact. So I don't want to overrule a council member's motion, and in fact, I'd be happy to debate that one. So, I'm happy to get into it, but I want to make sure I'm not overruling your motion just because I don't agree with it. So, Director Galante, you had a comment on the practicality of that, or?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's correct. So, in order to, for example, postpone the cells for the planters, all the trees, all the irrigation system. Then in the future, in 3, 4, 5, 10 years, we'll need to pretty much destroy the sidewalks again in order to install those systems. If we need to go with irrigation systems and stuff like that. Tree location, that's a different story. But we need to be very specific about what you want to see on the calculation, because right now the package includes irrigation systems, electrical conduits for benches, in order to recharge phones, stuff like that. So it's a lot of electrical work and irrigation work just below the surface that is considered surface work on that package. But we need to be specific about what to delete or not or postpone.
I see the city manager as well.
Just on this point, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I think when we went to the first set of amendments, I was imagining that leaving this meeting, if there was a vote in this meeting, Director Galante's people would start working with ISL right now and start revising documents that would become the tender documents that go out. And that's feasible. I could see that in line with Christine's comment earlier at Infrastructure and Protective Services Committee. I think that's feasible. If we're leaving it open-ended and we don't know what the final design is, then the redesign engineer can't put pencil to paper until we land, until we tell them what that is. So we've got to look at all the cost components, pick and choose which ones we want to do now and which ones later, and then ask the design engineer to pick up his pen. That's the delay that I think would cause a significant delay in the tendering.
I guess I'm equating this to when you do a rough-in a basement bathroom where you put all the mechanical there and you've capped it. All I'm asking is, can we put all the mechanical there, not change the RFP, cap it, and just leave the pretty landscaping that we were doing in front of the farmer's market? Just leave that piece out now. I don't know how that would change this. We're just changing, not saying tree walls, I'm just that one little piece. If that could be deferred to a later date, we could still do all the base work, we could still do all the stub-in work, we could still do all of that stuff. Now, I guess what I would like to know is what the costs of some of those where it says downtown and it's the nice cement little corners that we're putting in, what the cost of some of those units are. And if that could be deferred for later. I'm not trying to change the entire RFP. I'm just trying that one little line item. The tree walls, I understand anything base and below, it changes the scope. This is an aesthetic thing that's on top of the surface that I feel could be added later on.
So appreciate the priority for you on this. I think the best way to deal with it maybe to have that as a proposed amendment. So we have one design element in consideration that Councillor O'Toole had with the parking lanes. That's specific in the motion. You could make a motion to amend to delete the above ground flower bed component, meaning what you're describing. And then we can have a discussion and debate on the practicality, and there may be arguments about that, about the practicality of doing that, approving the project and doing that. I think that's probably going to be the best way to deal with it, because it sounds as though it's important to you. We need to ascertain whether there's support for that among the rest of council, and whether the others see it that way.
Okay.
So your motion would be to amend Councillor O'Toole's motion to include the deletion of the, maybe I'll leave you to just, I don't know if administration.
Exactly what the problem is. Exactly what are we removing?
Is it the above ground flower planters?
Yeah, I get, yes.
That's it.
Yeah, that's all I'm asking about. Just removing those at this time and finding out a cost number.
Okay. Well, no, you don't have to justify it right now. We're just want to make, so Councillor Platt's amendment. I'm sort of looking at Arlene, right? Because we need to make sure that we get what it is that we're discussing and debating, which we'll do eventually. Councillor Platt's amendment is with the deletion of the above ground flower planter element. Is that, yeah. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So that's. As painful as it, sorry, and not the motion, as messy as the process is, that's in order. And that gives us something that we can actually discuss and debate, whether we agree with it, whether we don't agree with it, whether we, whatever. That's something that we can vote on. And so we will have discussion and debate on Councillor Platt's amendment to the motion. Okay? So Councillor O'Toole's main motion is still there. We're just discussing whether or not we include this concept that Councillor Platt's brought forward. Okay? Okay, so there's a queue here. People ready to discuss the amendment? Okay, Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I still need to be in the queue, though, for another issue. So, but on this amendment, I can appreciate where Councillor Palat's going with this. However, in the scheme of a project that's going to be $15 million, I don't think we're saving substantial amount enough to add, if it's $30,000 to add that later. Although, you know, we don't know the cost of that right now, I don't think it's substantial. Like, somebody needs to guesstimate on that. So, but I won't support the motion just because I think it's such a small piece of the overall project that that part of it, just get it done. So, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Clayton. Councillor Friesen?
I'm not, thank you, Mayor Given. I'm not sure that I need to speak to this. I actually, just having quickly calculated, would be inclined to agree with Councillor Clayton on that. Having initially thought it was a really good idea. When you consider the percentage based on the overall, I don't think it's probably. I probably would not support it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Mayor Gavin. My objection to the amendment is the same as has already been expressed. I won't say it over again.
Thanks very much, Councillor Blackburn. I see Councillor Tools in the queue, and Council, I'll just inject my view into the debate here. I'll say this at the start of the term. I try to do this now, so I'm in the middle rather than wrapping up. I'll leave that to other council members to wrap up, but I should get a chance since I got elected to have a view on issues. So I won't support the motion for two reasons, in addition to ones that have been mentioned before. First, as has been identified actually by Councillor Platt himself, there is the perception, or at least a concern, around construction fatigue. I would prefer to do downtown once every 20 years than have significant projects that will interrupt traffic and and access to businesses every 5 years or 10 years. And so I think there's that concern for me. Throwaway construction costs are a concern. And then finally, in terms of practicality, I think the amendment is not practical in terms of implementation. I think, although it may seem like it's a surface treatment in the analogy of stubbing in, I can appreciate that, but I think that they are more structurally foundational to the project in terms of the other services that are connected into them, and structurally foundational to the concept of the project of beautification of downtown. I mean, at some level, this project does work on two layers. It's intended to beautify downtown and improve the infrastructure that's there. And so for those reasons, I can't support the amendment. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I will not be supporting the motion. We have another partner downtown, and that's the Downtown Association. And they gave us the blessing when we designed this, and they had a big part of the design. And I think that we can get rid of maybe the tile on the roads, but I think the outline appearance is what they were looking at. So I will not be supporting that.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Toole. So that's all the council members that had in the queue for discussion and debate on the amendment. Our practices, and I think by our rules of engagement at the council table, we give the mover of the motion an opportunity to close. If there's anything else, Councillor Platt, that he'd like to do to close the motion before we go to a vote. Okay. Just trying to make sure that we get in a regular practice, so when we do it on other motions, everybody knows how it's supposed to go. Okay, so I don't see anybody else in the queue for discussion debate on the amendment as proposed by Councillor Platt. I will call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Clayton has just let me know. Councillor Clayton's just let me know that she voted incorrectly. Councillor Clayton, can we just reflect Councillor Clayton as having voted in opposition? Okay, without having to read. Okay. Okay. So now we're back to the motion, the main motion as originally proposed by Councillor O'Toole, Phase 3, 2018, subject to Aquaterra considerations and with a design change of asphalt rather than paving stone lanes. Open for discussion, debate, and the queue filled up well. Thank you. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'm going to ask a quick question to administration, then follow it up with a motion. I am looking at the sidewalk, the different surface material options. For this concrete that was priced out, is that ordinary, just plain old sidewalk concrete, or is that stamped to replicate the feel of pavers?
Dr. Galante.
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. We cannot use stamped concrete because it's very slippery. So this is just regular broomed concrete. We explore also the idea of color concrete. However, it's very difficult to maintain consistency and the colors. The discoloration is different. So this estimate is just for regular broomed concrete.
Okay. Thanks, Director Galante.
Well, thank you, Director Galante. I appreciate that. I'm still going to make this motion, and that would be I'm going to move that we amend Councillor O'Toole's original motion to use concrete for the sidewalk treatment. The reason for this is I do appreciate the aesthetics the pavers bring. I feel we've got that on 101 Ave. There we also have the tabletop finished with the curb, and I think it is well set up for festivals, events, and special uses. And I really love the idea of spending the extras as we have for where we're going to be having community gatherings. But I think for day-to-day use, I'm not convinced in spending approximately $300,000 or $150,000 extra dollars per block to have pavers instead of concrete. I'm not convinced in the extra cost of that. So I'm going to move that we amend the motion.
Okay, so that amendment's in order. See, that's why we worked through the process so much in the first one, because then it's a little bit smoother. So Councillor Bressy's motion is to amend Councillor Toole's to be reflective of concrete rather than paving stone sidewalk treatment. So open for discussion and debate on the amendment. And so there's a queue here, and so we'll just keep going with people that were in the queue. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I would not support that motion. I'm actually rather in favor on the other side. I think we've got a beautiful design downtown, and in keeping with our strategy of strengthening our core and a long-term commitment to enticing more people to downtown, I think that's a real significant block of downtown that I would like to see consistently beautified. So I won't support Councillor Bressy's amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. Councillor Clayton.
Sorry, I'm in the queue from the other.
Next. Okay, Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I agree also, and I think that it's important for us to think about whether or not these small cosmetic changes on a $30 million, or in this case, $15 million project are worth compromising the original design. So I would speak not in favor of the amendment.
Thanks, Councillor Blackburn. Councillor Palat.
I just want to clarify, because there was lots of numbers and things getting thrown on there. For phases 3 and 4, and I know we're only talking about phase 3, it was 1.8 million for paving stones and 1 million for concrete. So about 400,000-ish for phase 3. So I will be supporting Dylan's change on this, because I think if we're going to still stick with all the other aesthetic things, the boxes that I just got my butt handed on and all those kind of things, I think we can still achieve a really good look downtown. I'm also concerned about how that paving stone is going to hold up over time, and I'd like to see us see how that works out, and so I will be supporting Mr. Bressy's change amendment.
Councillor Platt. I will speak in opposition to the motion. I think that for some of the reasons mentioned previously, but also there was a pretty extensive engagement process around the design. We've had a number of open houses where we've physically taken roll sheets of here's what it's going to look like out to the public, to the general public, to downtown business owners, the Downtown Association. That's what everybody's seen, and that's what the Downtown Association provided us a letter of support on recently, saying, go ahead with phase 3-4, get it done. Make some adjustments, and we heard about some adjustments that have happened in previous phases and some adjustments that have happened to the design based on that feedback. We didn't show anybody a downtown with flat gray concrete sidewalks. I believe, and I'm supportive of the main motion with the asphalt, the change of asphalt from paving stones in the parking lanes. I think that that's one that the majority will be accepting of. I think that this is such a fundamental change that to do it off the cuff without that kind of level of feedback is really problematic, and so I can't support the motion. Is anybody else in the queue to speak to the amendment? I don't see anyone, so we'll call for the vote on Councillor Bressy's amendment to revise the design with concrete rather than paving stone sidewalks. I'll call for the vote now. Please vote. So voting yes would be in favor of the change. Thank you. That motion does not carry. Okay, so we're back to Councillor O'Toole's main motion. Councillor Clayton's been in the queue a couple of times. Councillor Clayton.
So I'll ask questions so that I'm not out of order because I got missed before the motion was made from Councillor O'Toole. But direct my questions to Director Galante. Is there any cost implications of phase 3 starting in 2019 to finishing phase? Is there any cost implications to wrapping up phase 1 and 2? I can't ask you to speculate on what the increase in construction costs may be in 2019, given the potential economy, but I'm wondering if there's been any there be any cost implications of wrapping up 1 and 2 based on not doing 3, and then what would be based on a 10-year sort of construction high and low be the difference on projects? Is it 10%? Is it 30%?
Sorry, Councillor Clayton, I'm not quite sure that I just wanted to make sure that I understood your question as well. Can you just rephrase? So the premise of the question is, what is the impact on phase
1 and 2 if it's delayed by a year? If phase 3 is delayed
if phase
by a
3
year?
is delayed to 2019,
Yep.
what is the impact on phases 1 and 2?
Yep. That's the first part of the question.
Director Galante?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sort of phases 1 and 2 are pretty much completed, are pretty much finished. There's a small list of deficiencies. We are going to enter into a 2-year warranty period right now, but I consider phases 1 and 2 substantially completed.
Okay.
If the project is delayed a year, let's say 2019, the numbers you're seeing right now on the cost estimates are pretty much based on real construction cost used on phase 1 and 2. Okay, so that is the intent of the cost estimate. Keep in mind that the real number, you will see that when we open an envelope from a real contractor after a tender. That will be the final number that can be different compared with the $15 or $30 million we're talking here. We're all talking estimates here, and there is a level of uncertainty attached to the estimates we're discussing here. So impact in 2019, construction costs may go up if the general economy is picking up. That has been the trend in the past. When oil patch is busy, in general, construction costs go up. So I would say it depends the macro economy or the regional economy. But as we heard yesterday, the trend is going up. So if we delay the project, we may see an increase in cost.
So a couple things. Is there a contingency in this $15 million? How much? What percentage, sorry?
That is correct. There's not one global contingency. We have, because the project is so complex, we have different levels of contingencies attached to different items. For example, to give an example, the environmental component has a larger contingency for potentially contaminated sites. So we associate contingency with risk. So there is no global number as in a smaller project. So we have to dig deeper into the cost estimate with probably hundreds of line items to come up with the different contingencies. So it's a deeper exercise.
Sorry, I had another thought there. I might have lost it.
There are others in the queue. We can come back.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Mayor Given.
So we're on the main motion.
So I'd like to speak in opposition to the main motion, and I won't offer an amendment because it would be contrary to the motion itself. I'm not at all in favor of going with only phase 3. First of all, because there are probably costs associated, additional costs associated with going with phase 4 as a separate tender at a later date. And as was mentioned by somebody a little earlier, I believe that attracting bids for a smaller project, as in 15 million instead of 30 million, may change the quality of the tenders that we receive. I'm in favor of the existing design, and this is why I'm a little bit unsure about the idea of having subject twos in the motion. I think that if we're going to be making cuts that basically are relatively minor in terms of the overall cost, that I just don't think that it's practical to be trying to save just a few bucks at the expense of getting the project done on time and properly. And I have concerns about design changes, although we've heard assurances otherwise. I have concerns about the risk of design changes causing delays. We had a lot of consultation over the last couple of years, as has already been mentioned, with all kinds of user groups and the public in general, with a very well laid out design and well laid out demonstration of what that design should look like. The consultation did involve taking in people's comments and making some changes based on those kinds of comments. And so I think that the design that we've been presented and the design that we would go ahead with without any kind of changes is very acceptable. The potential for growth downtown is certainly going to be increased by following this design and getting it done. I really do believe that getting it done as soon as possible, and as you mentioned earlier, getting it done once and for all for a longer period of time is really a desirable objective. And so with those kinds of things in mind, I would suggest that what we have in terms of a present proposal should go unchanged, both in terms of design and timing.
So thanks, Councillor Blackburn. If I can offer a suggestion, and this is available to any other council members, we do have the ability to ask to have a motion split when there are discrete elements. So in this one, for example, the design amendments could be split to vote them up or down. So when a motion's on the floor, we have a couple of different options. You can vote you can ask to make a motion to amend the motion, right? To include something that wasn't included. If there's something that you may support the main motion, but not support a portion of it, if they're discrete elements, you could vote or request, and that's not needed a motion, request to have a portion of that main motion split. So you can vote on that independently. And so I'm appreciating in your comments, you're talking specifically about the proposal to amend to asphalt rather than paving stone parking lanes. You may wish to have that split from the main motion so you could vote on that independently. And then that main motion would move forward. You'd be able to vote whether or not you wanted to support the project itself. And you don't necessarily have to support something you might not agree with that was tied up in that main motion. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And so I would, is a motion that I would make that says just a request that we request the motion into two parts so that the subjects,
the change to asphalt parking lanes be split from the main motion.
I'm also concerned about it being subject to the contribution from Aquaterra.
Sure. So maybe we can have the motion split into the three parts, if you like. They're distinct, and you could have it split that way. So there's three different votes because there may be we're getting a different range of levels of comfort with this. Some council members are comfortable. Let's do the whole thing, get it going. council members are comfortable with that only under discrete conditions. And so I think that that's fair. So if we split the motion to, when it comes to voting, we can discuss and debate them all sort of together. When it comes to voting, we'll vote on the motion to go ahead with phase 3, 2018. We'll vote on subject to the Aquaterra contribution. We'll vote on the change in design for paving in the lanes. Have I muddied it or have I made it clear? I'm just trying to make sure that council members get to vote on what they want to get to vote on, and that we don't put somebody in a position of having to object to a move forward position on something they might otherwise support because there was something hidden in there that they couldn't support. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it would be important to consider the order in which we consider them as well. I think that the main part of the motion has to do with approving phase 3 only. And I would hate to see that one voted on first because
if there's something that the motion doesn't consider, any council member has an opportunity to have another motion after the fact. So if, again, I appreciate that this is maybe a bit challenging in terms of the discussion. If you're comfortable with seeing phase 3 and 4, my advice would be you may want to support phase 3 going ahead, and then you may want to follow up with your own motion to also include phase 4. Either that or you vote against something that you might be in support of and run the risk that other people vote against it for some other reason. Yeah. Well, an amendment. Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying here? If you're in support of phase 3, you can either roll the dice and see if you can get phase 3 and 4 and vote against phase 3 in the hopes that you get phase 3 and 4, or you can say, I'll support phase 3, and then after that, I'll see if there's anybody else that wants to support phase 4. Is that? Councillor O'Toole, do you have something on that?
Yeah, actually, I made that motion to do phase 3, just because the administration said that that's all they were going to be able to get in that next year. And I was going to come up with a follow-up to do phase 4 after the next budget.
Well, so
that's the same thing.
So a follow-up motion is possible as well. It doesn't preclude, it wasn't exclusive. It didn't say do phase 3 and never do phase 4. Right? So we wouldn't be excluding that possibility. Okay. So when we come to vote on these, we'll vote on them discreetly. Okay. Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. YCAB, you started maybe the longest motion we may ever go part of as this council, but
you don't know what's gone in the past years, my friend.
And you know, and again, you're not wrong, Councillor Plott. A couple of things that we should all just give ourselves a bit of space to do this, because it is not an insignificant project for our community. It is one that was high profile in the election. And we're a new council doing this. And so we should give ourselves some room to do that, even though, again, it's a bit messy and maybe not as smooth as we'd like. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah, we're good.
So not to throw yet another wrinkle into this, but I don't know if this needs to be an amendment or not. But I would be supporting Mr. O'Toole's motion. But I need to know that we're going to have a communication strategy in place that we're all comfortable with, that we have a traffic mitigation plan that we're all comfortable with, and that there's a marketing position deployed properly. So I don't know if I need to amend that motion, because my concern is that we approve that and then those things don't happen and they get missed somewhere. Because that's been very clear when campaigning with Downtown Association. Those were very big factors for them moving forward with this. So I don't know if we need to capture that in that motion or not.
Mr. City Manager.
My opinion, Mr. Mayor, is that you do not need to specify the details of execution. Administration takes its direction from council, and we can take that direction around the table in conversation. Doesn't need to be, because it's associated with the execution of the project, doesn't need to be included. We would certainly follow the direction of council, and I stand accountable for that to council.
Additionally, on the slide that hasn't been up for a while, but there is a discrete item around downtown rehab and communications phase 3 and 4, $250,000. So we get to have that communications discussion specifically around that item. Do we allocate resources?
Okay. And so I guess just for protocol here, do we need to instruct administration, or has administration's got this captured that we're going to figure out the traffic and that stuff as part of this now, that we don't need to dispute it any further?
I think at the risk of being a bit flippant, we direct administration what to do. We expect that they do it well and to our expectations, and if they don't, they're held accountable for that. I was going to say it a bit, a bit cruder sort of way. If we don't, we fire them, right? If they don't do it well, we fire them. But so council decides what we want to do. We have a level of expectation that administration does it well, and based on what they've heard, council raises priorities, right? So if they're not hearing us well, then that's an issue in itself. That is great. That is more overarching and more fundamental than the specifics of an individual project. So I think it's fair to say they've heard the need to do that, and when council gets a chance to influence that when we discuss the communications resources.
Thank you. So I guess no further amendments for me for Mr. O'Toole's motion.
Councillor Clayton.
I'm just looking at my notes to see if I want to say anything. Give me one sec. Yep. Okay. So this is a question for administration. Thank you. If the tender for phase 3 was put out here, what's the period of time that a tender is valid for? So if we tendered it in 2018, it's valid for 12 months, or what's it valid for?
Director Galante.
So the period that we will keep this tender on APC and published at the national reach is about 4 weeks. And then after controls and opening the envelopes and doing the qualification of the companies, there is an award provided by council. And we have 90 days to do the award after selecting the successful bidder.
And then how long is the tender valid once awarded?
Okay, so we can stipulate that on the tender documents and on the contract.
All right. So where I'm going here with this is that if we were to tender this in 2018, in order to potentially save some money to expedite this project, so that it was on the books. However, we could, to lock in a lower price, we could actually have the project completed in 2019 and pay for it in 2019. We award the tender in the spring of 18, knowing that the work is to be done in the spring of 19.
Mr. City Manager?
In all likelihood, Mr. Chairman, you would pay more because the bidder on the contract would have to be insuring themselves for the period of inflation between the time that they committed to the project and the time that they would have to do it. So they would, not only would you pay their anticipated inflation costs, but an insurance buffer associated with them protecting themselves against that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ressi?
Thank you, Mayor Given. I think I'm going to be making a motion, but I am open to advice on process. And it involves this communication piece, which in my mind shouldn't be discussed after. It is whether or not I'm going to vote to approve this or not. It does depend on my confidence in administration's ability to execute. And I do have confidence in the people we have, and I do have confidence in what I've heard from them. That being said, we need to resource them with the proper tools to be communicating well and to be doing this well. So I'd suggest that we have that discussion now and get it added to this motion, because I would hate to approve this project going forward and then all of a sudden we don't approve money that in my mind is needed to make the execution of this successful.
So are you making a motion?
Well, the motion that I'm thinking about making, but once again I'm open to process, is amending Councillor O'Toole's original motion to the project being inclusive of $250,000 for strategic communications.
Okay. So I think that would be appropriate. Just in terms of the amount, Councillor O'Toole's motion is reflective of phase 3. 250 was the strategic communications amount for phases 3 and 4. Would you like to reflect half of that amount? Okay.
No, I think
that was the amount needed for the years of 2018 and 2019 for communications. It might be more appropriate to ensure that the amount of communications moves along with the amount of project that's being done.
Yeah,
that could be a lot of communications for one phase.
I think I'll leave the $250,000 in my motion, trusting that administration will use the appropriate amount, not using money just for the sake of using it. And the reason I'll leave it in is twofold. A, I think it's likely, well, maybe this is optimistic, but I'm hoping, along with Councillor Blackburn, that if we approve phase 3, we also do approve phase 4 right away for reasons already stated. And the second reason is I don't know the level of execution, but I want to give administration freedom of there might be upfront costs with marketing, signs we need to produce, whatever, that might, phase 4 might be cheaper communication. It might not be 50% spent later. So I'd love to leave that freedom there. So I think I'm going to make the motion with 250,000.
So the motion is to amend Councillor O'Toole's motion to include $250,000 in strategic communications, funding for strategic communications. Okay. Okay. So that motion's open. That amendment to the main motion is that Councillor Bressie is determined that he'd like to include to see that amendment at $250,000. So we're open for discussion, debate on Councillor Bressie's motion to amend to include $250,000 for strategic communications. Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I like where Councillor Bressie is going with this, although I said I wouldn't jump in with another amendment on Mr. O'Toole's motion, but I wouldn't be able to support it at the 250,000. I do think we need to split these into each phase in specific amounts, so I wouldn't be able to support that.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Plott. And now we're getting really into the details. I don't believe we can have an amendment to an amendment. Oh,
sorry. Well, once I've had 2 minutes to reflect on it, I'm open to.
Okay, so Councillor Bressie can amend his own motion if he wishes to reflect 125,000.
Sure.
Which would be half the amount. Okay.
Sure.
So Councillor Bressie's amendment is to reflect the 125,000 for strategic communications as an inclusion in Councillor O'Toole's main motion. Any discussion or debate on that 125,000 communications amendment offered by Councillor Bressie? Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Given just a point of clarity, under Councillor O'Toole's original motion, was that including the communications as well for that phase 3? No. I'm just going to put it out there. If we move forward with this, we've already discussed our operational budget that we would be requiring a full-time staff to help project supervise and manage this entire project. The last time we put in $150,000 in the communication strategy, and I hate to say it, but it didn't work. Council was stuck wondering where all that money went. If we give money to our administration, give money to me, I'm going to spend it for sure. I'm not saying that they're spending it recklessly. I'm saying that our administration learned a lot through the process, and where we might have frittered away dollars in the early goings, we learned a lot from it, and I'm not sure that we're going to require that, especially if we move forward with this project, and which is going to require having a project supervisor handling all the communication strategically and whatnot. So.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Mr. City Manager.
I would just caution, Mr. Chairman, on that point. I've attended, I think, all of the Downtown Business Association meetings since arriving here and when this has been on the agenda. Councillor Thiessen is right. We have learned a lot. We also have new resources in the organization that are highly skilled in strategic communications. That having been said, we have a very high expectation in not only the downtown core, but all of the ancillary effects of disruptive construction projects downtown, that we handle this in an exemplary fashion, and that won't be able to be done cheaply. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we would spend all the money whether we needed it or not, but the intention and certainly the dialogue at the Downtown Business Association was, please make sure that you put an enormous effort into ensuring that the directly affected businesses receive appropriate communication, the ancillary or consequentially affected businesses do so as well, and that the public receives appropriate communication on traffic patterns so that they don't start avoiding downtown because they're not sure exactly what streets are open. I think this amount of money would be well spent if we try to execute this project.
Councillor Clayton.
Nope, I'm good, thanks.
Councillor O'Toole.
Actually, I was going to ask if the city manager could speak on it, so he did. So I guess my question is
You're good.
Wrapped up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I was in support of the motion when it was for the full amount. I'm not in support of dealing with it as an amendment to this motion if it's not for the full amount, because we do have it as a separate item that can be dealt with and debated properly later on.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Councillor Blackburn. There's nobody else in the queue. I'll take the opportunity to say I'm supportive of the amendment. I think it's appropriate that council shows a commitment that communications are a part of the capital project, that we see that if we're going to do it, we need to communicate about it well, and those going in lockstep. So I think that having it as a part of a omnibus motion, or dealt with at the same time, is appropriate. And I'm happy to deal with the allocation of communications resources in segments along with the project. So when we consider phase 4, we'll consider the communications that would go along with phase 4 as well. That also may give us an opportunity to strategically readjust if we find the amount wasn't enough or it was too much. But for all those reasons, I'll support the amendment. I don't see anybody else in the queue to vote on Councillor Bressy's amendment to the main. So I will call for the vote. Please vote on the inclusion of 125,000 in 2018 to support strategic communications around downtown phase 3. Yes or no? Thank you. Everybody's good? That motion passes. So we now have Councillor O'Toole's motion as amended. Okay, Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. On his motion, is it the 15 million, or does it include the optional addition to phase 3 of an additional 3 million?
I didn't hear Councillor O'Toole specify the optional phase, the optional. Councillor O'Toole, do you want to clarify your intent?
My intent was to start and complete phase 3 was all of it.
Sorry, there is an additional $3 million. So did you mean 15 million, or did you mean the additional 3 million?
What is the extra $3 million? Can I hear that, please?
Director Grande.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The additional $3 million is for an option on phase 3, is to reconstruct same type of design, going down to the replacement of underground utilities for one block along 100 Street, between 100 Avenue and 101st Avenue. It's one block. The design is not done, so it's not possible to physically build this road in 2018. However, can be constructed at any time, but not in 2018 because we need to do the design first.
Just Councillor Toole, while you're considering, I'll just look to Arlene. Arlene, what did we? We've been around this a bit, so I don't remember where we were when we started. Did we say $15 million in 2018, or do we specify an amount? No number. It was just include downtown phase 3. Okay. Okay. So thanks for the ask, Councillor Clayton. I was assuming that was the $15 million because it didn't say phase 3 plus the optional addition. So, Councillor Toole, what was your intent?
Well, just some comment here. Originally, the phase 3 could be done in 2018, which that's what I was hoping for. But with this option, it won't get done until 2019.
No. Phase 3 the $15 million project as per estimate of phase 3, which would be from 102nd Street to 100th Street, can be done in 2018.
Yes.
This optional amount is on screen, different screen. Oh, sorry, I thought you were going to show the map. The $3 million would cover 100th Street from 100th Avenue to 101st Avenue. Only one block there. So the little gray part.
Well, I can see us opening up with a bunch of amendments, but I would say go ahead with the whole thing.
We can't do it in 2000.
It's not possible in 2018.
No, that's what I mean. So we do 2018, the original phase 3, and to go ahead in the future with the extra part.
So if I can give you a suggestion.
Or do we just leave it out?
If somebody wanted to really try and approve that now, that would be a subsequent motion.
Okay, we'll leave it out.
Okay. Okay, we just need to clarify the intent. Wasn't your understanding to include that?
And I have another question on the motion.
Councillor Clayton.
I guess it's more of an observation. So based on this, because it's cost estimates, when do we think, Director Galante, when is it going to come back with the real price? Before the end of the year?
I'll answer on behalf of Director Galante. It comes back when we open the envelopes.
Pardon me?
Director Galante, when would administration expect to have the tender opening?
Thank you. The tender package will be completed by mid to late January. February will be a tender period, and by mid-March, we expect to open the envelope, and that will be the real price. So keep that in mind. We're talking all cost estimates here with the level of uncertainty.
So we're back in the situation where the contractor will have 6 weeks to get started, basically.
Well, the constructability on roads here is pretty much early May, if we're lucky.
So 6 weeks.
Because of the frost penetration in the ground. There is no snow coverage on roads and sidewalks, so the frost penetration goes up to 3 meters, between 2 to 3 meters deep in the ground. So before May, mid-May or early May, if you're lucky, there's no way to do work on frozen ground.
Councillor Thiessen.
I just wanted to make sure that we're still voting on split motions, the three parts.
We'll vote on the main motion as discrete items. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to chime up. I was speaking with my friend Helen Rice last night, and I told her I wasn't going to say anything in regards to this downtown project, but I believe I have to now because judging by the way the conversation is circled, I think I might be on my own ship sailing to my own set of land here. Where I want to land on the downtown is for it to be a prosperous and beautiful place. But what I am seeing before me is our administration has not recommended it, but that is totally within council's purview to bring that back in. I believe that if we're thinking strategically, we should think strategically in the fact that we learned our lessons from the last phase of the downtown, that the costs went over and above what we thought they were originally going to be. Yes. Whether opinion or not, stated fact or not, the communication needed some learning curves, and I think we've learned that. But it is my belief that if this is to proceed in a profitable fashion, we need to think strategically, and maybe at some times we have to put the brakes on certain projects. And I believe that we need to put the brakes on the downtown and come together with solid plans. And be thoughtful about where we're going with this in the future. Now, I've heard Aquaterra's name thrown around as to maybe they should be picking up more of the tab. I believe we need to have that discussion before we make any funding decisions. I've seen that 65% of the cost is surface costs. To me, those could be phased in with MSI monies or any future grants that are coming to the province over the course of a decade or two. We don't need to do it all right away initially. The other portion of it is that including our debenture payments when this is all paid off at the very minimum of what we've got listed in front of us, which is $33.25 million. After those are paid off after a 30-year debenture, whether we're doing half of it or all of it, is going to cost our taxpayers $24 to $48 million, and it's going to cost our organization $1.6 million in debenture payments per year. So that's jobs, that's programs, that's other initiatives, that's borrowing capacity. I'm sorry, I love the downtown and I want to be able to support this project, but I don't want to do it irresponsibly, and I don't want to continue to do it irresponsibly. So my vote on every portion of the split motion is no, whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, and whether it passes or whether it doesn't. That is my stance. It has always been my stance, and I want this thing to go forward responsibly. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Thiessen. I certainly don't take any objection with the position of a council member, but I think it's important to clarify that the project was awarded for $20 million, and to my knowledge, the city has not spent any more than $20 million. And so that fact that it's gone above the cost is incorrect. Is incorrect. So the city of Grande Prairie has not spent more than council budgeted for on the project. There were contributions from others, accurate. Aquaterra contributed. The city of Grande Prairie has not spent more than we budgeted at all. So the position, appreciate your point on the desire for the project or not, or the approach to the project, but in terms of what the city, because that's an important thing. The public needs to know that council said the city of Grande Prairie will pay this much to do this project, and that is what the city of Grande Prairie has paid. There have been contributions from others, which is fair. Aquaterra has contributed funds, but we have not paid more out of the city taxpayers' funds, provincial grant funds, than was budgeted for. Councillor Thiessen?
Fair enough. I think if we want to talk transparency with our public, we should have been saying right at the start of this project that this is going to be potentially an $80 to $100 million project, and we might not have gotten the support from the downtown, and we might not have raised the hopes of our public either.
Sure. Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Geez, I love the passion out of you there in that Hug Me shirt. It's good. I have to say, I'm with Mr. Thiessen on that, and in his own way, that I was originally told this was a 4-phase, $20 million project, not a 2-phase, $20 million project. So I was under the same realization or understanding as Mr. Thiessen on that. I still want to come back to the motion that's originally been made. The what-if scenario, so we say yes to this motion today, Aquaterra comes back and says no, or the tender comes in at $8 million. What's our opportunity then to say no to this? I guess
the answer to the question is, at each one of those stages, council says no, if they choose. If there's no longer support to move forward with the project based on subject to, or the tender price coming in higher than council has a willingness to fund, then we say no.
Okay. I guess that may change my opinion on it, because I have a hard time getting the rallying the troops moment of it, and then finding out that Aquaterra doesn't come to the table, and that the budget is $18 million and not $15 million. So that is a concern for me, because if we're saying something today and we're going ahead in principle and we change it, boy, oh boy, I have a lot of empathy for the business owners downtown. I don't want to get their hopes up and then in 4 or 6 months dash them yet again. So it might be changing my perspective on it.
Yep. Thanks, Councillor Platt. Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Echoing some of the comments of Councillor Thiessen, I can't support this motion for a few reasons. I think that ultimately, the time frame is too short. The tender is going to come in March, and once again, we'll have a contractor in a rush situation like happened in the past phases. And then construction season gets delayed, as it did in some of the occasions. And of course, weather is always an element that we can't predict. I also have concerns about what happens. In my opinion, this comes forward. It comes at $18 million, as Councillor Plott references. Then council kind of gets held to the fire to make these decisions, because the communication is already out there that the project is going ahead. And I hate being handcuffed to situations, because communities in a situation where some of the people supported it and they've rallied other troops. And if we knew all the costs in front of us now, I'd be much more comfortable making a decision. We don't know where Aquaterra stands on this. We don't know what provincial grant money is out there, and based on too many variables in there, I can't support this motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. I'll just take an opportunity to, this will be my last, I won't speak on the motion or any of the parts any further. I will say that I'm in support of the motion. Through the process, going back to the Hirschfield report that was initiated in 2014, at that stage, there was information available in the public domain that was discussed at public committee meetings with the Downtown Association that identified that the overall cost of the downtown enhancement could be in the order of magnitude, right? Order of magnitude, before any design happened, before we picked a planter or a surface treatment, of $100 to $140 million. So there was never a discussion that we could do all of the downtown for 4 phases and $20 million. As we progressed, there was an estimation further in the design process before tendering that might have been possible, but there has always been information available that was in front of council that the whole downtown could be in an order of magnitude of $100 to $140 million. So that does exist. And we have reports adopted that say that, and appreciate what council members say. There were points through the process where we thought we may get that. Council saw that we couldn't get 4 phases for $20 million. And council never approved a project that was 4 phases for $20 million. In terms of tender award, I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that for phase 1 and 2, council awarded the tender on referring to the information administration supplied on June 27th of 2016. June 27th. So we missed basically 2 full construction months. And so starting at the start of May gives another 2 months of construction time. That isn't behind the clock. Absolutely, it was a challenge being behind the clock in the first 2 phases. Moving forward and allowing some certainty for administration to develop the proposal now is significantly different than we saw in the last few phases. And finally, this is a strategic level issue that we all heard about in the campaign. And from the people that I heard about, there was a understanding that the subsurface infrastructure was important. There was a desire and a willingness from the 1,300 participants in the survey from downtown businesses and the association to see a better aesthetic for the downtown, a more walkable downtown. And for me, it hits on every one of those points. I continue to be in support of the project, and I hope that there will be other council members that will be as well. I'm happy to discuss phase 4 at a future date, and I don't see a need to support everything all at once, because we need to give ourselves the ability to course correct should we need to as we go forward. And I appreciate that it's at $30 million. It's a pretty large chunk for anybody to swallow at once. So let's give ourselves a bit of breathing room to do that, but would encourage council members to move forward, to support moving forward with phase 3 in 2018. Councillor Minhas.
Thank you, Mayor. Well given. I support this motion. There's a couple of reasons. I agree with Jackie and Wade for the cost reason. But other side, if you look at the cost, not going to come down. If you go to 19, I'm pretty sure it's 15 to 20% cost will be gone up because the economy is picking up. Every year the cost goes up, depending on the oil price, all the stuff. So it's better to do it now, even in a short period of time. We are late, should have been done because of this time, but I'll support this motion to go ahead and fix it. Thank you.
Once again, trying to talk with my mic off. Thanks, Councillor Minhas. I see Councillor Bressie, and we'll just give Council sort of we'll get you in, Councillor Bressie, sort of a notice that we should probably move on to voting on the motions. Let's do what we can. We've had discussion, I think, on each one of the points and that we've had in there sort of inclusively. I'm not sure that we need to have debate on each of the motions, but I think we can vote independently on each of the motions. Is that fair? And so if we want to get debate, let's get it out, finish it now, and then we'll move on to voting on each of the motions, or sorry, the motion in each of its parts independently. Okay, Councillor Bressie?
I've been back and forth on this since I launched my campaign in April. I will ultimately be supporting this motion. I'm glad that we did find some cost savings in terms of going to the asphalt in the parking lanes if we do pass this motion. I think it is one of those things that has to be done eventually. I think we're in a favorable climate to be taking on debt now rather than in a few years. I'm worried if we delay it, we're going to be seeing higher costs with lower quality due to a pickup in the economy and a pickup in the business of our contractors. I also realize that we're not going to see a full cost recovery for our debt servicing with economic development downtown anytime soon. That being said, we will see a partial cost recovery with that. I'd like to see that development happening now rather than whenever we do this. So I'd like to be getting that in. It's clear to me we're going to be taking on this debt and we're going to be doing this eventually. I'd rather be reaping the benefits sooner rather than later. So I'll be voting for this and I hope others will too.
Thanks, Councillor Bressie. I don't see anybody else in the queue. If that's the case, then I'll just look to the mover of the motion to see if they wanted to do anything to summarize or if we've covered it. Councillor O'Toole, to close.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to close. I've been involved with this since last council, and we had made changes. We did come in and we had to decide numerous times. And at no time when you enter a meeting where you have to cut costs, you feel good about it. But this is a feel-good situation where we're going to enhance the beauty of downtown, encourage businesses to develop and spend money, and encourage visitors to come down to the downtown core. So I would really look forward to supporting this motion, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor O'Toole, for the close. Thanks, Councillor O'Toole, for the close. Turn my own microphone off again. So we will move on to voting. There are a number of subsequent motions. I'm going to suggest that we vote on them almost in reverse order. That we vote first on the design consideration, right? That we vote then on the communications consideration. Then, okay. We made that as an amendment to the main motion to include it. So, okay. Oh, sorry. In the main motion, the 15. Okay, sure. Okay. So then the other discrete portions then are the subject. Well, I guess actually there's really only two. Yeah. Okay. So there's only two portions to vote on. There's the go ahead overall subject to appropriate discussion with Aquaterra and the design. So it's just the design consideration. We'll do that first because it affects the oral one. Okay. Thanks for the help. Thanks for the help. Okay, so I will call for the vote on Councillor O'Toole's motion. Councillor Blackburn?
I thought that we split out the consideration of Aquaterra's participation as well.
Yeah, that's where I was going, because there are some of us that are supportive of going ahead whether or not Aquaterra is... Right. Yeah. Phase 3, Aquaterra, and that's okay, that's what I had. Okay, so we're going to go... We're going to go, as I was saying before, but still with that one deletion. So we're going to do the design consideration, parking lanes, pavers or asphalt, subject to Aquaterra contribution, and then finally on the overall project, go, no go. Okay. And we have lost one council member. Okay, thanks. Okay. Thank you again, Council. Thanks. This is team effort. It's team sport on the Council table. So I will call for the vote on Councillor O'Toole's motion that the downtown Phase 3 project reflect a design inclusive of asphalt rather than paving stone lanes. Parking lanes. Okay, so we're in reverse order. So that's the design amendment. Okay, so everybody's clear what we're voting on? Okay, I will call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Now we will call for the vote on the making the project subject to appropriate contribution. No, we did discuss, there was a question whether we had to vote on the design consideration around sidewalks. We had a discussion, debate, I believe, around that and attempted motion on it. 4 amendments on that, yeah. Okay, so let's keep on pace here. We'll close this one out. So we will call for the vote. So we'll call for the vote on making the project subject to an appropriate contribution from Aquaterra. Okay, or I will call for the vote. Please vote. Okay, thank you. That motion carries. Okay, and so finally, we're to the main motion of moving forward with downtown rehab Phase 3 with all these sort of amendments or considerations in 2018. Ready to go? Okay, please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Okay. So we've dealt with downtown rehab Phase 3, inclusive of strategic communications. Are there any other downtown related motions to come today? Councillor Clayton.
For matter of process, do you need a motion on Phase 4 to be, what is your intent with Phase 4 to move it to the next budget or what?
So I'll look to administration just to make sure that I have my understanding correct. If council took no action, it would not be reflected in the 2018 budget and would be up for consideration in the 2019 to 2022 budget. Is that, I see administration in a few spots nodding that that's correct. So if there's no other action, it will not be reflected in the 2018 budget.
Okay, so I guess my next comment, I won't make a motion, we'll leave it at that. I don't know what the intent of council is, but I wondered if we could tick one more item off the list if that was all right.
Well, let's. I just want to do one last call around this because I have a sense that there may be something else coming on phase 4, and we'll just give people that opportunity if they wanted to propose it. Councillor O'Toole.
As I promised, I said I would make a subsequent motion to bring phase 4 to the 2018 4-year budget.
Okay, included in the 2018 budget?
Yes.
Okay. And so can we, okay, so that motion's in order. Can we all agree that it would be under the same conditions as we just fought our way through?
My intent is that as well.
Okay. So under the same design considerations and the same subject to?
Yes.
Okay. So we don't have to go through a bunch of, so we know what it is, and with the same communications, strategic communications. So it's basically a repeat of the second one, but with respect to phase 4 in 18.
It can still be voted down, but it's in the books.
Okay. So that, now we've just got one package to vote on. Okay. Councillor Plott.
If I'm understanding right, we're talking about whether we're going ahead with phase 4 and the whole process with that now.
Just to be specific, to add phase 4 to the 2018 budget. And the reason that I'm being specific there, or highlighting, is that it could potentially, I suppose, be tendered altogether. That'd be the one implication. The other implication is that council would have an opportunity to consider whether or not they went ahead with it, under what conditions in the 2019 to 2022 budget as well. So there's, I suppose, a pro would be it could be tendered altogether. A con, but another perspective could be council could also consider whether they want to do it in the context of the next budget cycle.
Okay. So as we've approved that we're going ahead with phase 3 now, I couldn't support that we looked at phase 4 for the reasons earlier mentioned, that I'm not convinced that we're going to get better pricing trying to tender this all at once when you're looking at what we think could be the very peak of the construction and market in 2019. I don't think it would be prudent for us as a city to be looking at doing that phase. I'm also really concerned that by that point, if we start this conversation again now and it's back to the empathy piece of downtown, that we give them hopes that we're going to go ahead with phase 4. I'm not convinced that there's not going to be a lot of construction fatigue coming our way. So I wouldn't be in support of going ahead with phase 4 and planning at this point.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you. A question first. The borrowing wouldn't have to all happen at the same time, right? We would borrow in time to pay for phase 4 when we need it.
Yes, the city's practice, and subject to being corrected by administration, the city's practice is to borrow, to undertake borrowing as needed for the project, and typically midway or later in the project process, certainly not at the outset, and definitely not immediately when the project's awarded.
And I would speak in favor of the motion for the reasons that I articulated earlier. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Blackburn. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I know I've spoken out against the cost of this project, but just for clarity, because in the previous motion, Councillor O'Toole tried to get the downtown optional addition to phase 3 added in. Are we also going to be discussing that in phase 4? Or is
that would be separate? So
okay.
It's essentially the same package as with the previous, and so the optional is not on the table.
So my vote isn't going to change. It's going to stay the same, but I'm not as concerned about the phase 4 project going through with 2018. I do see that there's going to be 3 checkpoints that we're going to be able to hit. One of those checkpoints is subject to Aquaterra's funding. Potentially, council can decide what to do at that point. Other is once we receive the tender for phase 3, we can decide what we're going to do at that point. So at this point, it's just planning, but I'm still going to vote no.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I would not support this motion. I think that any potential savings we would see in getting the 2 phases bid together would be offset by that buffering that a contractor might build in for a project that's potentially not done for 3 years out. So I don't think there's any harm in waiting till 2019 to consider. Or sorry, 2018 to consider it for following. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Friesen. I'll just say that I am very committed to the downtown project, but I agree with some of the reasons just previously stated. I think council gets an opportunity to consider this in the context of our 2019 to 2022 budget. I will absolutely be supporting it there. subject to anything substantively changing. But I remain committed to the downtown project. I think we get a chance to consider it as a next phase in context of the overall budget, and I'll be happy to support it when it comes up then. But I'm comfortable that we don't need to do it right now. Any other discussion or debate? Seeing none, then I will call for the vote. Please vote. So the motion that we're voting on is Councillor O'Toole's motion to reflect the downtown rehab phase 4 package, inclusive of communication and subject to appropriate Aquaterra commitment in the 2018 budget. No, we're not developing a 4-year budget. We're doing a 1-year budget. Your motion is into the 2018 to reflect it in 2018. Okay. Any other discussion or debate? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. And that motion does not carry. So that is an item that will come back for council to consider in the context of, over the course of the next year, in the context of the next budget deliberations next fall. Are there any other downtown related project motions? Okay, seeing none, my advice would be that we're ahead of schedule. We've moved in probably through the certainly in terms of scale, one of the most significant items. Mr. City Manager, I'll look to you. I think it may be appropriate that we would break here, finish for the evening, reconvene tomorrow, and look to make some headway as council gets through the next sections. Would you concur with that? Is there anything additional that you see?
No closing remarks, and I concur that this would be a good spot for us to stop for the day, and we can start first thing tomorrow morning.
Then council, with that, we're concluded. Thanks very much, everybody, for the good work today. And again, I hope we're all easy on ourselves as a group and individually. This is a messy process. Budgets are at the best of times. We are all new and operating together as a group. Some of us are new to the council table, and so it's to be expected. I think we have a good result that gives administration clear direction, and whether we agree or disagree with that direction, our intent should be as a group to give administration clear direction, which I think we've been successful in. So take some time. And we will see everybody tomorrow morning.